Chapter 1481. Everyone's gazes couldn't help but land on Harris. Originally, he could have gotten this vote easily, but he pushed this vote to Mag himself. Harris smiled, and gave the hill a thumbs up. You are indeed Ian's granddaughter. You can make a fair choice. Grandpa once said that you are a strict and fair chef. He was right. The hill nodded slightly, and looked at Geoffrey with respect. Fairness is the most basic respect for one's opponent. Harris smiled nonchalantly, and looked at Geoffrey and Novan. The two of you, please make your choice too. Since that's the case, let me try this cow's scalp. Apart from being used to make leather armor, this is the first time I know that cow's skin can be eaten. Novan picked up his chopsticks, and picked up a thin piece of cow's scalp. The cow's scalp was rich in colloid, and looked translucent. It was also covered in a layer of chili oil, and then he put it into his mouth. The spiciness exploded in his mouth first. He bit into the cow's scalp, and the soft and chewy texture made Novan's eyes light up. The cow scalp, which was supposed to be very tough, was exceptionally soft and sticky. His teeth could easily cut it open. The plump collagen made the scalp taste a little sticky, but the stew fragrance perfectly neutralized the stickiness, making the scalp extremely sticky. It was like a gentle trap that he stepped into unknowingly, and then was dragged into the abyss of deliciousness. Novan savored it carefully. This was the first time he knew that cow's scalp could be so delicious. After swallowing it, the aroma lingered. To be able to make cow's scalp into such a soft and delicious delicacy, Mr. Mac is really admirable in terms of creativity and culinary skills. Novan put down his chopsticks, and looked at Meg with admiration. Then, he regretfully said, however, at my age, I still like to eat something fresh and delicious. Out of these two cold dishes, Harris' 18-year-old maiden dress suits my taste better. So, I choose the 18-year-old maiden dress. That should be the case. Meg nodded slightly. Taste was the most subjective thing. Some people wouldn't be as satisfied as a bowl of porridge with salted vegetables even if they had delicacies in front of them. Everyone's eyes fell on Geoffrey. He was the only one who hadn't tasted it yet. Geoffrey furrowed his brows as he looked at the bright red spicy husband and wife lung slice. It had been many years since such an oily and tasty dish appeared on his dining table. Just like what Novan had said, at their age, they liked to eat something fresh and delicious. Harris' dishes suited his taste very well. However, since he had agreed to be a judge today, he couldn't make a decision without tasting it. He picked up his chopsticks and picked up a piece of beef heart. The dark brown beef heart was thin, and one could see some fine muscle lines. The red glossy oil added a beautiful color, and the spicy smell that assaulted one's face was not as pungent as one would imagine. After looking at it for a while, Geoffrey put the beef heart into his mouth and chewed it carefully. The thin beef heart melted as soon as it entered his mouth. Just by chewing lightly, the spicy flavor exploded in his mouth. His taste buds, which had been dormant for a long time, seemed to have been splashed with a scoop of hot oil. With a sting, he instantly went berserk. That intense feeling even made him somewhat unable to control his body. Rip! The sound of cloth tearing could be heard. The clothes that were originally tightly buttoned up actually burst open 3 times, and the clothes underneath were even torn a little. The clothes were torn. Everyone couldn't help but exclaim when they saw that. They didn't expect President Geoffrey, who had always been stern, to have such a strong reaction when tasting this dish. This taste. Geoffrey was already completely immersed in the spicy flavor in his mouth. There wasn't any weird taste of organs, nor was there any oily feeling. The spicy flavor was the perfect interpretation of this mouthful of beef heart. His taste buds, which had been dull for many years, seemed to have fallen into a vengeful cheer. He seemed to have seen his younger self vaguely. He had traveled extensively, and had almost traveled all over the Norland continent. Back then, he also liked to eat meat and drink wine in big mouthfuls. He pulled carts of goods and was determined to conquer every piece of land. Time flew by, and he could no longer ride a horse to continue expanding his business empire. His calm heart was ignited again because of this passionate taste. The big ship that was the family Morton had been stagnant for many years. His expectations for Cyril were no longer for him to continue expanding the family. He only wanted him to be able to protect the Morton family now. But now, a crazy idea appeared in his mind. What if it was someone else? What if it was Gloria? With her ability and tenacity, would she be able to set the Morton family sail further and catch up with the Buffett family again? He felt his heart beating faster, and the hesitation in his heart gradually became firmer. After a long time, Jeffrey slowly opened his eyes. His forehead was covered in sweat. He looked up at Meg, and a smile appeared on his stern face. He said, "I should have passed the age of liking this kind of dish, but this dish makes me feel that it is an exception. It brings me a feeling that I haven't felt in a long time. So, I choose the husband and wife lung slice." "Thank you." Meg nodded slightly. He was a little surprised that Jeffrey would choose him. Another judge voted for Meg. He was temporarily leading with a score of 2-1. Master Harris is still as good as ever. The 18-year-old maiden's dress is even more stunning. Mr. Meg's husband and wife lung slice uses 5 ingredients from a cow to create a unique delicacy. It is even more surprising. After a difficult choice, I choose the husband and wife lung slice. Robert raised his hand and gestured in Meg's direction. Then I won't comment further. Mr. Mac's husband and wife lung slice is more to my liking. It would be even better if there was alcohol, Michael said with a smile. Husband and wife lung slice vs 18-year-old maiden's dress. The final result was 4-1. Boss won this round. Yarbemia jumped up happily. Smiles appeared on the faces of the girls in the restaurant. Their nervous expressions relaxed a lot. If they lost the second round, this competition would be over. Looks like the husband and wife lung slice is better than 18-year-old maiden's dress in terms of taste. It's just a cold dish. Master Harris made it feel like a work of art, while Mr. Mac made it feel like a main dish. Although there is a winner, I don't think there is a difference in strength. The score is now 1-1. The competition has entered the climax. Who will be able to stay in this competition? I'm really looking forward to it. The audience also started to get restless. They were all excited. Can I try these 2 dishes? At this moment, a weak voice was heard. No pop-up window. Chapter 1482. Vanessa looked at Harris and Meg carefully. Although it seemed a little inappropriate to say such things in such an atmosphere, she really wanted to try the beautiful 18-year-old maiden's dress and the husband and wife lung slice that was not inferior to the hot pot tripe. She would definitely regret it if she missed it. "Of course, young lady. This is what I promised you just now," Harris said with a chuckle as he looked at Meg. "Young friend, you wouldn't mind, right? Miss Vanessa is a regular of the restaurant." "Of course I wouldn't mind," Meg also said with a smile. "Isn't this too blissful? She's as good as the 6th judge." The audience looked at Vanessa enviously, and wished they could replace her and taste the deliciousness of these 2 dishes themselves. "Thank you." Vanessa thanked him happily, and walked to the judges' table. She bowed slightly to the judges before picking up a clean pair of chopsticks, and picking up a piece of radish. The radish that was cut into a diamond-shaped radish looked crystal clear, and had a faint fragrance. "What a beautiful radish." Vanessa sighed before putting the radish into her mouth. Crunch. A crisp sound could be heard. The sweet and sour radish was very crispy, and the sweetness of the radish blended perfectly with the slightly sour sauce, awakening her taste buds instantly. It was refreshing and appetizing, and perfectly matched all her expectations of an appetizer. Of course, the most important thing was its beautiful appearance. Even though a part of the skirt had been eaten, it did not affect the beauty of the skirt at all. It was like a short skirt that had been cut short, but it gave off a different feeling. It was pleasing to the eye. Vanessa turned around to look at Harris, and joyfully said, "This is the most beautiful and refreshing appetizer I've ever eaten." Harris smiled, and was satisfied with Vanessa's comment. "Now, let me try the husband and wife lung slice." Vanessa's gaze landed on the plate of husband and wife lung slice, which was only half a plate left. When the judges heard that she wanted to taste it, they reluctantly put down their chopsticks and gave her 5 or 6 slices. The bright red oil was the most beautiful color in her eyes. Ever since her teeth recovered, She was completely addicted to spicy hot pot. If she didn't eat hot pot for a day, she would feel uncomfortable all over. Moreover, because of her love of insanely spicy hot pot, she had gained a little fame in the hot pot circle and was known as Little Chili. She liked this nickname. It gave her a sense of accomplishment. No one had ever given her a nickname since she was young. Tripe. Vanessa's gaze was fixed on the remaining piece of tripe. She impatiently picked it up with her chopsticks and scrutinized it before her eyes. The bright red oil was the most beautiful coat, and the densely packed tripe looked quite beautiful, emitting a tempting spicy smell. It tastes different from hot pot tripe, but it's just as tempting, Vanessa muttered before putting the tripe into her mouth with a solemn expression. The familiar red oil taste was naturally much milder compared to the insanely spicy hot pot, but the spiciness wasn't weak. It was still rich. When her teeth bit into the tripe, the springiness brought about by the bite made her eyes light up. Unlike the thin and crispy tripe, the slightly thicker tripe had a pleasantly surprising texture. It was crispy and springy, bringing about a wonderful chewing experience. The braised tripe had a stronger fragrance than the tripe, and the more one chewed, the more fragrant it became. Vanessa felt that the world had suddenly become quiet, and she was the only one left, enjoying the happiness brought about by chewing the tripe to her heart's content. Gulp. Everyone looked at the blissful Vanessa and couldn't help but swallow their saliva, feeling a little stifled. This tripe is really on the same level as the tripe in hot pot. It's so delicious that I don't know how to describe it. It's just like. Vanessa opened her eyes and looked at the expectant faces of the crowd. She blushed and thought for a while before her eyes lit up. Just like the tripe. Everyone immediately burst into laughter. She was really a beautiful and cute girl. Vanessa stuck out her tongue a little embarrassedly, but that was the only adjective she could find. After eating a piece of tripe, Vanessa sensibly put down her chopsticks and retreated into the crowd. Anyway, as long as there was a new product, Mr. Mac definitely wouldn't hide it. She would eat to her heart's content when the new product was released. However, before she left, she couldn't help but look at Meg curiously and ask, "Mr. Mac, this husband and wife lung slice doesn't have husband and wife in it, and there's no lung slice either. Why did it use this name?" Everyone looked at Meg curiously when they heard that. This was also a question that everyone was curious about. Although the regulars of Amy's knew that Mr. Mac's dish names had always been strange, such as Beijing roast duck and Yangju fried rice, they couldn't understand it at all. However, this time, it was a little too ridiculous. Just like how the bass button can be used to catch any fish other than bass, there's no fish in the eggplant with garlic sauce. There's a reason why the name husband and wife lung slice appeared, Meg said with a smile. Oh, Vanessa replied thoughtfully. There was indeed no fish in the eggplant with garlic sauce. Congratulations, young friend. You've won the second round, Harris said graciously as he looked at Meg. Thank you for letting me win. Meg cupped his hands together. He didn't underestimate Harris at all. The reason why he could win this round was that the husband and wife lung slice had played a decisive role. If it had been a similarly bland cold dish, with the 18-year-old girl in front of him, he reckoned that it would have been even colder than the cold dish. Harris' disciples were looking at Meg with nervous expressions now. Although they were very confident in their master, the ability displayed by this young chef really surprised them. It wasn't because they had too much baggage, but because Meg had raised the stakes for today's duel. If their master were to lose, second senior brother, if master were to lose, are we going to call him great master? The youngest junior brother asked worriedly. In terms of seniority, that's indeed the case. That senior brother started to pick his nose nervously again. Now that we've each won one round, the winner of this third round, the soup duel, will determine the winner of today's duel. Harris looked at Meg with a smile. No matter who loses this round, we will definitely have a master-disciple relationship today. If you become my master, what do you plan to teach me? Meg pondered for a while before pointing at the plate at the side, and saying, I can teach you how to make this husband and wife lung slice. This was probably the dish where the ingredients were the easiest to obtain. As for the process, it wasn't a problem at all for a chef of Harris level. In that case, even if I were to lose this third round, I would feel like I've profited. Harris smiled, and his gaze gradually became determined. However, I will still give it my all in this round. If I win, you can learn from me any dish that I know. Chapter 1483. In the textile factory in the north of the city. The tall chimney was emitting dark yellow smoke. In the factory, all the machines were already in operation. The cotton was spun into cotton thread by the machine, and then woven into cloth by the dexterous elves. The factory had already successfully entered its operational state. Princess, according to your instructions, 300 million copper coins have been bet on Mr. Meg winning at all 10 gambling dens. Captain Ashley looked at Irina, and hesitated for a while before saying, if he loses, will it cause a strain on our military budget? After all, judging from the odds, the gambling dens seem to favor that chef who is going up against him more. If that's the case, it seems like we can get more money, Irina said with a relaxed smile. Captain Ashley looked at Irina's side profile, and left the office silently without saying anything else. That's my man. How can he lose? Irina said with a chuckle in the empty CEO's office. In the second round, Mr. Mac from Mammoth has won. The news spread to all the gambling dens very quickly. The odds of Meg winning were originally 1, 2, 5, but it immediately dropped to 1, 1, 2. Isn't Master Harris known as the invincible god of cookery? Is he going to lose today? Please don't. I've bet all my money on him. If he loses, I won't even have a roof to look for. I bet 100 on Mr. Mac winning just now. Let's see if I can get a free tofu pudding tonight. The gamblers at the gambling dens became restless when they saw the updated odds. Judging from the change in the odds, the gambling dens thought that Mr. Mac from Mammoth had a higher chance of winning. After all, when the news of the competition was released yesterday, the odds of Meg winning were 1, 5. Meanwhile, at the entrance of Mammoth, the atmosphere became a little tense after the big score of both parties reached 1, 1. The invincible god of cookery was very famous, and Mammoth was also very influential in Chaos City recently. This duel between Harris and Meg was already very interesting to watch, and now that both of them were showing their prowess, everyone was looking forward to the third round, which would be a soup duel. When the two of them were cooking the previous dish, they had already taken the time to simmer the soup in the pot. Meg stood to the side, calm and unruffled. The delicacy was quietly brewing in the old wine jar. Laying out the various ingredients was the most troublesome, but as long as the ingredients were laid out, the next thing to do was to wait. Because time was limited, he couldn't simmer it all afternoon like he usually did. Therefore, he prepared some of the ingredients in advance so that he could cook it in half an hour. Meanwhile, on the other side, Harris appeared to be much busier. His expression was solemn and serious as he carefully concocted this famous dish, sour beef bone soup. As a chef, he was naturally a little proud. This sour beef bone soup was his pride. When he was 18 years old, he rose to fame with his sour beef bone soup in the Roth Empire's southwest county city. Then, he was invited to Isen Castle by the Dwarf King, and became a distinguished royal chef. His sour beef bone soup was praised by the king and many distinguished guests. So many years had passed, but when he was mentioned, that sour beef bone soup, which was once hailed as the best soup in the world by the Dwarf King, couldn't be avoided. He took the beef bone, cut it, and put it into the pot. He added a few spices, and simmered it for a few hours. Then, he added the pickled radish that he pickled himself, and simmered it for an appropriate time. The delicacy was ready. The seemingly simple process contained many changes. First of all, the pickled radish was the soul of this dish. Without it, there naturally wouldn't be that unforgettable sour soup. Time ticked by, and the scene was rather quiet. Everyone was looking at the two chefs. It was a very rare opportunity for most people to be able to watch the process of the chef's cooking at such a close distance. Furthermore, the process of watching the delicacies turn from ingredients into delicacies made people look forward to this dish even more. Ding! The clock that Harris set rang first. Harris turned off the fire, and waited for 3 minutes before he reached out to remove the lid. A slightly sour aroma was released instantly. It wasn't the kind of sourness that was bad, but the kind that made people salivate. It filled the entire place instantly. Gulp tilde, the sound of people swallowing their saliva could be heard instantly. Everyone couldn't help but stretch their necks to look at the pot. This aroma was a little too delicious, and was irresistible. The thick, white beef bone soup was still bubbling. Harris put a wooden spoon into the pot and stirred it twice clockwise. Then, he took a white porcelain bowl, and scooped up a spoonful of thick, white bone soup with a few pieces of pickled radish in between. After that, he sprinkled some green onions, and a steaming bowl of sour beef bone soup was ready. This smell. Meg's eyes lit up, and he couldn't help but look in Harris' direction. Pickled radish soup wasn't something rare to him, but in his impression, he had never seen anyone who could make sour beef bone soup with such an alluring aroma. Anna's little nose twitched, and she softly said, "It smells so good. This Master Harris is really impressive." Yes, what an alluring aroma. It's just like when I see bayberries. I feel like I'm salivating uncontrollably. Yabemia nodded, but then became a little nervous. Boss won't lose this round, right? Boss took out Buddha jumps over the wall. It's impossible for him to lose. Connie, who was wearing a helmet, squatted behind everyone, and calmly said, "That's my master's favorite food. Look at that uncle's hair, almost all of it has fallen out. If we let him taste Buddha jumps over the wall personally, I think he might admit defeat on the spot." Everyone in the restaurant looked at the small tuft of hair on Harris' head, and naturally thought of those bald uncles who fought over the limited number of servings of Buddha jumps over the wall every day. They almost fought over it. Everyone suddenly felt that what Connie said made a lot of sense, and their moods became relaxed and joyful instantly. Meanwhile, the expressions of Harris' disciples also gradually brightened up. The second round was just an accident, and their master might have underestimated his opponent. However, when it came to soup, they could proudly say, "No one knows soup better than our master." When the sour beef bone soup appeared in the duel, it meant that the competition had ended. See, this is also a competition without any suspense. Our master is still that invincible god of cookery. Of course, he doesn't care about this title. That senior brother raised his hand again, and picked his nose with a relaxed and joyful expression. Master is indeed the best. The junior brother also breathed a sigh of relief, and a cheerful smile appeared on his face. He did not want a grand master to appear out of nowhere, but if there was a junior brother, it would be pretty good. Chapter 1484. 5 bowls of thick and white sour beef bone soup were placed in the soup bowls. Chapman went forward, and placed the bowls of soup in front of the judges. All the judges' attention was completely attracted by the sour soup in front of them. The aroma of the sour beef bone soup wafted over, and chased away all the coldness instantly. The sourness made them salivate, and they couldn't help but swallow their saliva. There's nothing more comfortable than hot soup in winter. Michael reached out to pick up the bowl of soup. The slightly hot bowl warmed up his calloused hands. He opened his mouth to blow on the hot air, and then drank a mouthful of soup from the edge of the bowl. The soup that was still slightly hot entered his mouth. The sourness wasn't sharp, and was instead very gentle. It blended perfectly with the rich bone soup, and brought about a very distinct layered feeling. The sourness brought about a pleasant taste experience. The warm soup brought warmth to him. It's still that sour soup that makes one feel happy and warm. Michael drank 3 big mouthfuls of soup before commenting with a smile, "This is the soup that should be drunk in winter. It's also the most delicious beef bone soup I've ever had. I think I can still have 2 more bowls after this bowl." After saying that, he lowered his head and continued to drink the soup. He was completely immersed in it. Hill looked at the sour beef bone soup in front of her, and her eyes lit up slightly. She often heard stories about Harris from her grandfather when she was young. He was the only chef that her grandfather would always mention. Every time he mentioned him, he would definitely mention the dish that made him famous, sour beef bone soup. Harris came to Chaos City 5 years ago, and she was fortunate enough to attend that gathering with her grandfather. The people who were present were the judges today, as well as the Lord of the Grey Temple, Roland, and the others. It was also winter that year. That was the first time she tasted sour beef bone soup. That wonderful taste was still lingering in her mind even after 5 years. And now, there was a bowl of sour beef bone soup in front of her again. There were a few fresh green onions floating in the thick and white sour soup, and a few pieces of dark yellow radish floating in the soup. The sour taste of the pickled radish mixed with the rich aroma of the beef bone. It was an aroma that made one's soul feel warm. The simple ingredients and cooking method allowed the wonderful taste of the ingredients to blossom in the ingenious collision. Hill picked up the spoon and gently pushed aside the green onions before scooping up a spoonful of soup. The thick and white soup originated from the beef bone. It was also because of the sour soup that it was so rich. Hill opened her cherry lips slightly and blew on the spoon gently before putting it into her mouth. It was a familiar taste. The mild sourness had a hint of sweetness. The aroma of the beef bone was mellow and wonderful in the soup. It was like soaking in warm spring water. His body and soul were completely relaxed, and his body and soul were both stretched. But there were some changes. It's a warm taste that made me want to immerse myself in it. Of it. You were still a little girl the last time we met, Harris said with a smile. But I was still captivated by this sour beef bone soup. Hill also smiled. She scooped up another spoonful of soup and blew on it elegantly before putting it into her mouth. She continued to enjoy the simple bliss brought by this bowl of soup. He received high recognition from the 2 judges. It seems like Master Harris will win this round with his signature dish. That might not be the case. Mr. Mac hasn't served his dish yet. You guys don't know what kind of divine dish Buddha jumps over the wall is. I heard that a prisoner in the Bastille prison next door couldn't help but jump over the wall after smelling the Buddha jumps over the wall. It was all for the sake of eating Buddha jumps over the wall. The audience discussed softly. Michael and Hill both gave the sour beef bone soup a very high evaluation. While making people curious about the real taste of the sour soup, they also had different opinions about the direction of this competition. Miss Hill's evaluation is warm and blissful. It seems like this bowl of sour beef bone soup is really delicious. Vanessa smacked her lips and swallowed her saliva secretly. It was a pity that she no longer had an official status to taste it. Although the sour soup is delicious, Mr. Mac's dish is Buddha jumps over the wall. That's going to be interesting. Abraham looked at the Shakesing wine jar in front of Meg with a smile. He would occasionally order a cup of Buddha jumps over the wall to taste. Even he didn't dare to eat such a nutritious thing every day. However, after he came to Chaos City, his body became healthier day by day, and some of his minor ailments were cured unknowingly. This is the most exciting duel I have ever seen. It's better than any duel I have ever seen in books, Vanessa also said excitedly. Jeffrey drank a mouthful of soup, and then used his chopsticks to pick up a piece of pickled radish. He took a bite, and a smile appeared on his face. The soft radish almost melted in his mouth. The sourness was almost diluted by the soup, and then soaked in the beef bone soup. It was sour and sweet, and still a familiar taste. About 30 years ago, he and Ian went to Issen Castle to discuss a business deal. They were still partners then, but they didn't expect to encounter robbers outside Issen Castle. His entourage was killed, and all his money was robbed. He was even beaten half to death. It was Ian who dragged him into Issen Castle. With no one to turn to for help, they collapsed on the icy streets. When they woke up, they were lying in a rather luxurious room. A young man brought them 2 bowls of soup. It was a warm soup that emitted a tinge of sourness. That was the most delicious soup he had ever tasted in his life. It was sour and sweet, and had a rich bone aroma. After drinking it, he only felt his cold body become warm, and the pain in his body was greatly soothed. That young man was Harris. He didn't have many friends when he first arrived at Issen Castle. When he saw the 2 of them lying on the streets, he got someone to bring them back to his residence. If it wasn't for that bowl of soup, there wouldn't be the Aden Chamber of Commerce later on, and there wouldn't be the Buffett banks that were all over the Norland continent now. He would never forget the taste of that bowl of soup for the rest of his life. Hence, even though they hadn't seen each other for many years, he still appeared here when the invitation was sent to him, and acted as a judge for him. Good soup, Jeffrey said as he looked at Harris. Jeffrey said to Harris as he looked at him. It was just like how he said those two words when he couldn't find the right words to express his gratitude after drinking that bowl of soup back then. Of course, Harris also replied with a smile, just like how he answered back then. Robert tasted a mouthful of the sour soup, and couldn't help but praise. The pickled radish stimulated the consistency of the bone soup, and also made the originally tasteless bone soup colorful. Be it the layering or the taste, it's amazing. It's also a top-grade soup. Meanwhile, Novan had already finished the soup in his bowl. He put the bowl down, and gestured to Harris. Another bowl? Your request is a little too much. Harris scoffed as he scooped another bowl of soup for him with the spoon. I really want to drink this sour beef bone soup. Everyone had already swallowed their saliva countless times as they stared at it. They only felt sourness in their hearts and mouths. This bowl of sour beef bone soup brought about endless reverie in everyone's mind. This soup should be the best in the world, right? Someone said softly. Right at this moment, Meg's bell also rang. Meg switched off the fire, and picked up a small hammer to break the seal of the wine jar. He then slowly lifted the paper seal. A rich meaty aroma suddenly appeared, and then swept in all directions like a wave. Chapter 1486. This is. The people who were indulging in the wonderful experience brought about by the sour beef bone soup could not help but look at Meg. The rich aroma surged over, and almost instantly covered the aroma of the sour beef bone soup. The extreme freshness of the seafood, the rich aroma of the meat, the refreshing aroma of the mushrooms, and the faint aroma of the wine. All the scents mixed together, and brought about an incredible aroma that made people indulge in it instantly. The noise gradually stopped. The audience looked at the wine jar in front of Meg, and could not help but swallow their saliva. What was in that jar? Why was it giving off such an alluring aroma? Even the aroma of the sour beef bone soup was completely suppressed. This is. Michael could not help but put down the bowl in his hand. He looked at Meg with a smile, and said, Mr. Mac really brought out the Buddha jumps over the wall. Is this the legendary Buddha jumps over the wall? I didn't expect the aroma to be so alluring. Hill's spoon could not help but stop as she looked at Meg with astonishment. She was not considered a regular customer of the restaurant. After all, there were hundreds of people lining up at Immerse, and Meg was famous for being a stickler for rules. She was not willing to waste an hour or two waiting in line just for a meal. However, she had heard people talking about Buddha jumps over the wall recently. Immerse was already famous in Chaos City's rich circle, and she had heard people talking about it on many occasions. But now, it seemed that this aroma had exceeded her expectations. The black pepper steak had given her a surprise before, and this Buddha jumps over the wall seemed to be something else as well. Chapman looked at Meg and the wine jar in front of him in shock. He was puzzled. This aroma is so special. How many ingredients did he put in this jar, and how did he make them complement each other and not mess up? The sour beef bone soup pursued the extreme simplicity. His master only put pickled radish and beef bones in the soup, and then sprinkled some salt. There were not too many seasonings, and there were no other ingredients to make a simple and delicious bowl of soup. However, the soup that Meg made was the complete opposite. All kinds of ingredients, exotic delicacies, and even wine were placed in a jar and cooked just like that. According to her master's philosophy, the ingredients would clash with each other and the taste would offset each other. No matter how precious the ingredients were, if they were carelessly piled together, the only result would be a pot of terrible food. However, Meg's pot of soup completely overturned this concept. The rich ingredients did not become a shackle to each other. Instead, they complemented each other, giving the aroma a rich sense of layering. It made people search for the familiar scents in the aroma as if they were looking for treasures, trying to guess what they were. Many of Harris' disciples had the same confused expression on their faces. At the same time, there was an additional hint of worry on their faces. It smells so good. Senior brother, is there really no problem with this fragrance? I feel that Master's sour beef bone soup has been completely suppressed. The junior brother whispered, could he know more about soups than Master? Impossible. That senior brother quietly put down his hand that was digging his nose. His expression was slightly unnatural, and he was a little flustered. This fragrance. Isn't it a little too overboard? Just the fragrance alone was already very alluring. Be it seafood soup, freshwater seafood soup, mushroom soup, meat soup. All of them could form a pot of soup on their own. However, there was actually someone in this world who put all of them together to stew. Moreover, the most infuriating thing was that it could be stewed so fragrant and alluring that the aroma wafted everywhere. Although his master was still the best in his heart, it was undeniable that this rich fragrance still made him a little flustered. You have to believe in master. Even if he really loses, we don't have to call him great master, that senior brother consoled. That might not be the case. We have always been the scapegoat. The junior brother sighed softly. However, his gaze gradually became determined, and he seriously said, "The fragrance of the soup is not enough. Master's sour beef bone soup does not rely on the fragrance to win. I don't believe that there is a soup more delicious than sour beef bone soup in this world." Yes, junior brother, you are right. We have to believe in master. The senior brother beside him nodded in agreement. Let me see what it smells like. Harris closed his eyes and took a deep whiff of the fragrance in the air. He could clearly distinguish the fragrance of all the ingredients, but there were some that even he didn't know what they were. However, that didn't affect his ability to analyze the fragrance. He separated the mixed fragrances one by one, and then couldn't help but exclaim, "Those that fly in the sky, those that swim in the sea, those that grow on the trees, and those that grow on the soil are all here. This combination is amazing." He was indeed a chef who strongly advocated using the original flavor of ingredients to cook, and Meg's pot of Buddha jumps over the wall could be said to be a textbook example of the original flavor of cooking. The rich fragrance didn't come from the condiments. Instead, it was presented after the fragrance of all the ingredients blended together. It was perfectly blended to create a wonderful fragrance. It was like the most perfect work of a master of seasoning. No matter which one was missing, the balance of the flavor would be destroyed, and no other flavors could be added. This is a genius among the seasoners. Harris looked at Meg with admiration in his eyes. To be able to have such achievements and abilities at such a young age, even he couldn't compare to him back then. Just the cover of Buddha Jumps Over the Wall had already caused quite a commotion. Meg was rather calm about that. He picked up the spoon, and scooped the Buddha Jumps Over the Wall into the ceramic bowl on the tray. Yarbemia walked up, and carried the tray to the judge's table. He placed a bowl of soup in front of every judge, and held the tray by his side. He nodded slightly, and said, "Please enjoy." The judge's attention was already attracted by Buddha Jumps Over the Wall. Apart from Robert and Michael, the other three had never tasted Buddha Jumps Over the Wall before. The brown soup was steaming hot, and the faint aroma of wine wafted into their noses. The fragrance of all the ingredients was competing with each other, and made everyone's eyes light up. They couldn't help but want to explore it. Apart from a portion of the restaurant's regulars, most of the audience present today were just passers-by. They had long heard that Amy's had a supreme-grade soup called Buddha Jumps Over the Wall that cost 10,000 copper coins per serving. They didn't expect to see it in today's duel. Their interest was piqued immediately. Master Harris' famous dish versus the Buddha Jumps Over the Wall that cost 10,000 copper coins per serving. Who would win? Robert scooped up a spoonful of soup, blew on it, and put it into his mouth. Then, he closed his eyes subconsciously. His expression gradually became interesting, and a blissful and surprised smile appeared on his face. After a long while, he opened his eyes reluctantly, and praised, "This Buddha Jumps Over the Wall seems to contain thousands of changes. Every time I taste it, I can always find an additional surprise. The combination of all the ingredients is wonderful to the extreme. After swallowing it, I still have an endless aftertaste. If sour beef bone soup brings me warmth and bliss, then Buddha Jumps Over the Wall will bring me endless reveries and wonderful experiences in the sea of delicacies. It might bring a brand new culinary mindset to the culinary world. Hence, I choose Buddha Jumps Over the Wall." Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 1487. Mr. Mac gets the first vote. Everyone was in an uproar. They didn't expect President Robert, who was still full of praises for the sour beef bone soup, to choose the Buddha jumps over the wall so quickly. Thank you. Meg nodded slightly at Robert. Is it really that delicious? Jeffrey looked at the Buddha jumps over the wall in front of him doubtfully. However, he still picked up the spoon and scooped a spoonful of soup into his mouth. The delicious soup slowly bloomed in his mouth, and the taste of all the ingredients appeared one by one, overwhelming his taste buds. It was undeniable that it was indeed amazingly delicious. However, to him, such a taste was unavoidably a little too complicated. Even his taste buds were a little tired of distinguishing the different tastes, and he lost the peaceful state of mind to enjoy the food. This is indeed a soup with a rich taste. It's amazingly delicious, and it can also bring a very wonderful experience. Jeffrey put down the spoon in his hand, and calmly said, however, to me, the taste of the sour beef bone soup is irreplaceable. A simple combination, simple warmth, and delicious taste are my choices. Hence, I choose the sour beef bone soup 1-1 tie. After Jeffrey made his judgment, the score was tied, and the atmosphere became tense. Which of the two soups with different styles would win? Everyone's gaze shifted to the remaining 3 judges. Novan picked up the spoon and drank a mouthful of soup. After savoring the taste for a while, he scooped a piece of chicken from the bowl and put it into his mouth. After tasting it carefully, he smiled and said, "The taste of this Buddha jumps over the wall that Mr. Mac made is indeed amazing. The delicious soup with a rich soul aroma, and the chicken meat that is soft but not rotten. However, I still choose the sour beef bone soup. Drinking a bowl of sour soup like this in the winter can always remind me of some warm memories. It's also an irreplaceable taste in my heart." The sour beef bone soup is in the lead. Everyone was a little surprised. The sour beef bone soup that was suppressed by the Buddha jumps over the wall in terms of fragrance actually took the lead temporarily. It could be seen that the sour beef bone soup was still good in terms of taste. What should we do? Boss Buddha jumps over the wall actually fell behind, Yarbemia said nervously. I suspect they're playing us, Barbara speculated, rubbing her chin. Elizabeth shook her head slightly. With their status, they don't need to do such a thing. The people in the restaurant, who thought that they would be able to rest easy after taking out the Buddha jumps over the wall soup, started to feel nervous. Everyone's eyes fell on Michael and the hill. The decision was now in their hands. Michael was already savoring the food with relish. He had a mouthful of soup and a mouthful of meat, and the expression on his face was so fascinating that the onlookers couldn't help but salivate. I didn't expect Castellan Michael to be so talented in Mukden, Abraham said with a smile. Uncle, who do you think will win this match? Vanessa asked nervously. Buddha jumps over the wall is the most delicious soup I've ever tasted, and I think it's the pinnacle that can't be surpassed. However, taste varies from person to person. Hence, Principal Novan and Jeffrey chose the sour beef bone soup. As for which one city Lord Michael and Miss Hill will choose, I don't know. Abraham shook his head with a smile, and lamented, this is really a fight between the gods. I've never seen such an exciting culinary duel. Vanessa rubbed her head, and said, yes. The 2 chefs that I like the most are actually dueling on the spot. This is indeed a match that didn't disappoint me. However, the result is still very nerve-wracking. Michael finished half the bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall soup in no time. He couldn't bear to put down the spoon in his hand as he looked at Harris, and said, the sour beef bone soup should be the most delicious soup on the Norland continent in the past 30-odd years. Furthermore, it hasn't been surpassed for many years, and has always maintained its original flavor. It's been perfected continuously with slight improvements. Until now, it's undoubtedly an amazingly delicious soup. Hence, I choose Buddha jumps over the wall soup. The audience, who thought they were going to announce Harris' victory, were shocked by the Castellan's sudden announcement. 2:2. Even. Everyone looked a little nervous, and some were even wiping their sweat. No one would have thought that a culinary duel could make people so nervous. Everyone's gaze landed on the hill. Now, only the vote in her hand was left to decide the final outcome of this duel. The hill furrowed her brows slightly. She felt a headache coming on. Why did the decision fall to her again? She suddenly regretted not taking a bite and announcing her choice first. Then, she wouldn't have to have such a headache. However, she quickly calmed herself down. After all, this was a very formal duel, and it also concerned the reputation and even seniority of the two chefs. No matter if it was Harris or Meg, they were both chefs that she respected. She had to get rid of all the subjective factors and make an objective judgment for these two dishes. After getting rid of all the distracting thoughts, her gaze landed on the bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall soup in front of her. There were all kinds of ingredients in the brown soup. Although they had been simmering in the wine jar for a long time, they still maintained the same appearance. The fragrance that drifted over made her eyes light up. Seafood, mushrooms, meat. There were so many fragrances that she couldn't differentiate them one by one. However, this didn't affect her from being intoxicated by the rich layering of the flavors. Different from the taste of the simple sour beef bone soup, the Buddha jumps over the wall soup was like a pot of extremely exquisite hodgepodge. The amount of control and the heat was just right, allowing each flavor to abide by its own territory and reach the pinnacle of freshness. Then, they were woven together in a wonderful way, creating such a unique and wonderful taste. Try the soup first. The Hill picked up the spoon and scooped up a spoonful of the brown soup. She blew on it gently before putting it into her mouth. The delicious soup slowly soaked into her taste buds. It was as gentle as a feather, and it moistened her taste buds like the spring rain. All of a sudden, it was as if spring thunder had struck. The freshness of the seafood, the mellowness of the meat, the freshness of the mushrooms. All kinds of flavors appeared one by one. The rich layering of the flavors seemed to be playing an intoxicating symphony on the tip of her tongue. Sometimes it was a light breeze, and sometimes it was a violent storm. Her taste buds went crazy. This is an incredible flavor. It's amazing and admirable. The Hill couldn't help but exclaim in admiration after swallowing a mouthful of soup. Looking at the translucent shark's fin floating in the soup, she couldn't help but scoop up a piece out of curiosity. The soup had given her a great surprise. She wondered what the shark's fin would be like. Slurp. The smooth shark's fin slid into her mouth and was soaked in the soup. It had a very wonderful texture. It was soft and tender, but it was full of meaty flavor. Before she could chew, it slid down her throat after one round in her mouth. She swallowed it after rolling her throat. The Hill touched her throat with a slightly strange expression. This strange texture. Wonderful bookhouse. Chapter 1488. Hill didn't have time to savor the shark's fin that slid down her throat. However, the smooth feeling spread from her throat to her stomach, and brought about a very amazing eating experience. She couldn't help but smile. Watching Hill eat gracefully was a kind of enjoyment for the people present, but it was also a kind of torture. With her status, ordinary people could hear many legendary stories about her, but it was hard for them to come into contact with her. However, when it came to enjoying delicious food, everyone's impression was the same. Joy and enjoyment made the people who were watching couldn't help but smile. Amazing shark's fin, Hill thought to herself. Then, she scooped up a piece of chicken with anticipation. The ordinary-looking chicken was light brown in color after being soaked in the broth. It looked very appetizing. She then put it into her mouth. She bit into the chicken gently, and it didn't have the expected mushy texture. Instead, it had the perfect amount of tenderness and smoothness. What was even more incredible was the rich meaty taste that came with it. It wasn't just the taste of the chicken. The aroma of wine, seafood, mushrooms, and all kinds of meats had all merged together and permeated the chicken perfectly. There was flavor within flavor, and it was mushy but not mushy when chewed. There was a rich aftertaste. Unlike the shark's fin, which she didn't have time to savor, the deliciousness of the chicken stimulated her taste buds continuously during chewing, bringing about a wonderful carnival. Hill felt her scalp turning numb. This was unbelievable. How did the chicken taste so delicious? It was mixed but not greasy, and there was flavor within flavor. It completely overturned her impression of chicken. Under the influence of the broth, it was sublimated and obtained an unparalleled deliciousness. It was a taste that could make one go crazy. After swallowing the chicken, the aroma lingered in Hill's mouth for a long time. He restrained his urge to continue eating, and put down the spoon in his hand gracefully. With a sincere expression, he sincerely said, "Master Harris, sour beef bone soup brings warmth and happiness to the winter, and also brings hope to people. It has an irreplaceable position in soups." Meanwhile, Mr. Meg's Buddha jumps over the wall made me experience an unparalleled deliciousness. The broth's scrumptiousness is astounding, and the food in the broth is so delicious that it makes one sink into it. Hill paused, and looked at Meg and Harris with hesitation. Who will it be? The audience also held their breaths as they looked at Hill nervously. Meg was smiling on the surface, but he was actually a little panicky on the inside. If he lost, many of his plans would be aborted, and he would have to consider how to face this cheap master. As for Harris, he also had a smile on his face. However, his slightly raised little finger, and revealed that he wasn't as calm as he looked. Amy's, and Harris's, and Harris's, and Harrison's and Meg's and Meg. Meg's, SS, Meg's is, Meg to herself. All the best, Mr. Mag. TSSSSS to make it. Of TSSSS. SS of SSSSSSTS. Meanwhile, Harris' disciples all looked rather nervous. After all, if their master lost, they would have a 30-year-old grandmaster out of nowhere. He was even younger than their eldest senior brother. The Hill pursed his lips and remained silent for a while before he said, "This is a very complicated choice, but I have to make a choice. After careful consideration and comprehensive consideration, I choose Mr. Meg's Buddha jumps over the wall." We won. Amy's staff immediately cheered. We're done for. Meanwhile, Harris' disciples looked at each other, and didn't know what to say. The undefeated record of the invincible god of cooking has been ended. Mr. Mac's Buddha jumps over the wall is indeed better. This victory belongs to Mamis. Mr. Mac has shown off his skills and gained a disciple. He's earned a lot. The crowd was in an uproar. Hill's choice meant the end of the match. Meg won the soup showdown with a total score of 2-1. The regulars at Amy's cheered and applauded. The strong sense of honor made them excited and joyful, as they shared the honor. This is a battle of great significance. Perhaps it will be seen as the end of an era and the beginning of a new era. In the past 30 years, Master Harris was almost the representative of the challenging chefs. He stood at the peak of the world of chefs with an undefeated record. And now, Mr. Mac may become a new legend because he's still very young. Vanessa said excitedly, her eyes sparkling with excitement. She never thought that she would be able to witness this duel with her own eyes, and even participate in it. Indeed. He's already standing at such a high position at such a young age. I wonder what he'll achieve in the future. Abraham nodded in agreement as he looked at Mag with admiration in his eyes. Harris smiled when he saw this. He had always felt that he didn't have the burden of being the invincible god of cookery. He didn't want to prove himself every time he challenged. Instead, he wanted to improve and improve through sparring with different chefs so that he could reach a higher level of delicacies. However, when he really lost, when the applause wasn't for him, he still felt a little disappointed for some reason. "Are you a sore loser?" Harris thought to himself in a self-mocking manner. Meg stood there and looked at Harris, who was smiling with a hint of loneliness, with a complicated look in his eyes. There wasn't much joy, and he didn't think that his culinary skills were far better than Harris. Harris was a real chef. He had a well-rounded technique, and a chef's heart that constantly chased after delicacies of a higher level. If he hadn't been instilled with the experience of countless chefs, if he hadn't had the test field for the god of cookery where he could practice countless times without stopping, or if he hadn't brought out the Buddha jumps over the wall today, he might still have been the one who lost this duel. He was only a chef who had learned how to cook a few dishes now. He still had a long way to go before he could become a real chef who could create all kinds of delicacies. However, he still won this duel in the end. What he needed to think about now was how to elegantly remind Harris that he had lost, and that it was time for him to call him Dad, no, Master. "Harris, aren't you going to try this Buddha jumps over the wall yourself? Apart from being delicious, isn't the most powerful effect of this soup to grow hair?" It's also known as hair growth soup, Michael said to Harris with a smile. Chapter 1489. Hair growth soup. Harris was taken aback. His eyes lit up, and he exclaimed, "You're saying that after drinking this soup, my soft and silky hair will grow out again? And my handsome face will be radiant again?" Hair can grow out, but if you want to say that your handsome face will be radiant again, you have to have it before, Michael said. That's not important. Harris turned his head, and stared at the altar of Buddha jumps over the wall beside Meg. He rushed forward, looked at Meg, and said, "Young friend, does your Buddha jumps over the wall really have the effect of hair growth?" "Practically speaking, that's indeed the case." Meg nodded, and said, "So far, Buddha jumps over the wall has already solved the problem of baldness for many middle-aged and young people." "It's true." Harris' voice dragged out as he looked at Meg with glowing eyes, and said, "Then, can you give me a bowl too?" Mag murmured. He hesitated as he looked at Harris, who was full of anticipation. "Didn't we agree just now? Whoever loses will call the other party master." Harris looked at Meg, cupped his hands, and said, "I'm willing to accept my loss, master." "It's over. It's really over this time." The senior brother who was picking his nose earlier collapsed in his junior brother's arms. "Senior brother, you have to be strong. Master has already called you master. What else can we do?" The junior brother put him down on the ground silently, and consoled him. "Huh." Meg looked at Harris, who called him master, and didn't know how to respond for a moment. "Ding. Congratulations, host. You have won the culinary duel and successfully accepted a disciple. Mission completed. Reward received, Great Teacher Talent Point +1, Midas Touch Enlightening Skill." Right at this moment, the system's voice sounded in Mag's mind. A cool and refreshing feeling exploded in Mag's mind as if his spirit had been elevated to a higher level. At the same time, a shiny golden skill treasure chest appeared. Meg's eyes lit up. He felt that he had obtained something, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. He smiled at Harris, and said, "You don't have to be so polite, my disciple." Harris and Meg were stunned at the same time. "Hey, why is it so natural for me?" Meg's expression was a little strange. Why is he so skilled? Could it be that they've rehearsed this many times? Harris also criticized in his heart. Come. Master doesn't have anything to entertain you with. This bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall soup is a greeting gift." Meg picked up a big bowl, filled it to the brim with Buddha jumps over the wall, and handed it to Harris with a benevolent smile. He had a rough idea now. The so-called Great Teacher Talent Points were probably to allow him to quickly adapt to the role of a teacher. Harris, who had wanted to complain, swallowed his words when he saw the Buddha jumps over the wall. He carefully received the big bowl, and didn't forget to thank his master. When the crowd saw this sudden turn of events, they were all stunned. Originally, they were still lamenting the end of the invincible god of cooking and were excited about the rise of a new god of cooking. They didn't expect the two of them to get into the mood so quickly and have already started to show their deep relationship in front of them. What's going on? Are all experts so resistant to attacks? I've long heard that Master Harris doesn't care about fame and fortune. I used to think that it was more of an exaggeration. Now, it seems like it's most likely true. I suspect that they are acting us. Many people didn't know how to express their emotions all of a sudden. Should we call him Grandmaster or Grandmaster? No matter what we call him, I find it very strange. It's all right. We can even call him Master. Why do we still need the burden of being an idol? Harris's disciples had a brief conversation. Grand Disciple Chapman greets Grand Master. Chapman went forward and bowed respectfully. Meg chuckled, and said, "You don't have to be so courteous. Grand Master doesn't have any greeting gifts to give you. Come forward. Each of you has a bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall as a greeting gift." Harris' disciples had weird expressions. However, since their master had already acknowledged him, and their eldest senior brother had also acknowledged him as their Grand Master, they couldn't hold back. Hence, they could only go forward a little bashfully. Of course, Everyone was also curious and indignant. They wanted to try what kind of soup could defeat the sour beef bone soup that their master was most proud of. At the side, Harris had already carried the big bowl to a dining table. He placed the big bowl down, sat down at the table, and tidied his clothes before picking up a spoon. The rich aroma rose with the steam. It was even clearer and richer than when they were standing far away. However, that wonderful balance was still maintained. As a chef, he naturally had his pride. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to make food that satisfied him. He also wanted to know what kind of soup could be deemed as surpassing sour beef bone soup. The white spoon scooped up a spoonful of thick soup. Although the soup was brown in color, it was still clear, and didn't have any crumbs of ingredients in it. To be able to ensure that even with so many different ingredients, his understanding and control of the ingredients was indeed very strong. After blowing on the hot air, Harris put the soup into his mouth. All kinds of flavors blossomed on the tip of his tongue. Every taste quickly materialized into a physical object in his mind. Abalone, shiitake mushroom, chicken, shark's fin, pigeon's egg. His mind had almost materialized into a paradise of animals and plant. The rich meaty aroma blended into this mouthful of soup, but it was meaty without being greasy. The wonderful taste tickled his taste buds. It was like a graceful young girl who knew all kinds of tricks, bringing different surprises at all times. The younger generation will surpass us in time. Harris sighed softly in his heart. This wonderful taste was indeed much better than the sour beef bone soup. Regardless of whether it was the combination of ingredients, the control of the fire, or the amazing cooking method, they all made him feel novel and powerful. He admitted defeat wholeheartedly in today's duel. However, this also gave him more thoughts and new cooking directions. The collision of ingredients that didn't differentiate between types could perhaps create an amazing delicacy. The soup stayed in his mouth for a while before sliding down his throat. It turned into a warm current that spread to his limbs and bones. Meanwhile, a ball of hot air suddenly rose, and rushed straight to the top of his head. Harris only felt a buzz in his head. His head felt a little hot, and his scalp started to feel numb. It was as if there were ants crawling on his head, or as if there were suddenly grass trying to push open the dry soil in a barren desert that had been barren for many years and emerge from the ground. Is this growing hair? Harris was dumbfounded as he felt something trying to break out of the shell above his head. This wasn't just medicine, it was a special medicine. Chapter 1490. The Invincible God of Cookery. Harris lost 2-1 to Mammoth Mr. Mac. The news quickly spread to all the gambling dens in Chaos City, and caused a commotion. Nothing major had happened in Chaos City recently, so many people had placed their bets on this duel. Now that the results were out, it naturally caused quite a commotion. The Invincible God of Cookery was very famous, and he had never lost before. Hence, many people had placed their bets on him, but they didn't expect him to lose to the boss of Mammoth. However, the gambling den owners who usually made a lot of money from unexpected upsets were all feeling melancholy now. Sigh, why is there such a weird person? He actually bet 30 million on the boss of Mammoth. I'm going to lose my underwear now. A bald boss sighed with a melancholy expression. Although the odds had been lowered when the bet was placed, the 3 times real time odds were still worth 60 million. Although he had received quite a lot of bets for this duel today, it couldn't reach 60 million no matter how he added it up. He still had to lose 30 million. Boss, do you think they are faking the duel and acting as us? A lackey reminded him. Yeah. Otherwise, how could it be so coincidental that someone placed a 30 million bet before the duel? This is the first time our gambling den has seen something like this, another person chimed in. The bald boss frowned and thought for a moment, then nodded and said, that's really possible. I want to see who dares to play this game in my Hualaroas territory. I must break his legs. The same thing was happening in all the gambling dens in Chaos City. Unlike normal gamblers who had lost their bets, the gambling den owners were all thinking about how to cash in that huge sum of money. After downing a bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall, Harris was already sweating profusely. His face was flushed, and there was even a cloud of white mist rising from the top of his head. He did look like an expert. However, he couldn't care less about showing off his value as an expert now. He couldn't wait to touch the top of his head. His wet head looked as if he had just washed it. The few strands of hair that were left stuck to his scalp. What surprised him was that there were some thin and short hairs on the top of his head that was originally as smooth as porcelain. It really grew out. Harris had a look of disbelief on his face. How many years had it been? His smooth hair started to fall off rhythmically 30 years ago. It started from the top of his head, and gradually spread outwards until it covered the entire top of his head. As a man who used to call himself the most handsome man in the world of chefs, Harris naturally couldn't accept this fact. During his years of traveling around the Norland continent, he had tried many hair growth recipes, but apart from accelerating hair loss, he couldn't find any effective way to stop hair loss, let alone trying to grow hair again. However, he did not expect that after drinking this bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall soup, his hair actually grew out. This kind of excitement made it hard for him to control himself. "How does it taste?" Meg asked with a smile. He had already gotten used to his elated state, and restrained himself a little. After all, Harris' experience and age were there for all to see. He didn't have the cheek to put on airs and treat himself as a master. "Master, if you had told me earlier that you had such a miraculous medicine, we wouldn't have had to duel. We could have just gone through the apprenticeship process." Harris looked at Meg with a resentful expression as if he was blaming Meg for hiding the treasure. Meg shrugged helplessly. Harris looked at the crowd that had yet to disperse, and loudly said, "Thank you for coming to today's duel. I am Harris, and I am willing to accept my loss. I will acknowledge the owner of Mammoth, Mr. Meg, as my master." Meg also stopped smiling, and cupped his fists at Harris. "Thank you for letting me win. I don't dare to call myself your master. I still have many things to consult you on." There was a moment of silence in front of the restaurant before a round of enthusiastic applause sounded. Everyone looked at Harris and Meg with respect in their eyes. These were two real chefs who appreciated each other. Winning or losing didn't seem to be that important anymore. How could one duel determine who was better in culinary skills? Michael glanced at the clock at the side. It was already 11 a.m., and he smilingly said, "Mr. Mack, I think it's almost lunchtime. Why don't you let us in for lunch? I've long heard that Mammoth's tofu pudding has become the beauty panacea for women in Chaos City. I wonder if I have the chance to try it today," the Hill also smilingly said to Meg. Robert added, "Come to think of it, I haven't been to Mammoth for a while. I heard they have released many new products recently. I have to try them." The audience who were about to disperse also stopped in their tracks upon hearing that. They were indeed a little hungry after watching such an exciting duel and going through so many challenges. Mammoth was a pretty good choice for lunch, so they might as well stay and try the delicacies cooked by this local chef who had just defeated the invincible god of cookery. With the status of the judges, they would be treated with the highest level of respect wherever they went in Chaos City. It was a very reasonable request for them to put aside their work to come and be the judges, and ask to have lunch before leaving. Meg looked at everyone with a smile, and said, "I've troubled all of you to come here for lunch. However, there's still some time before the restaurant's opening hours, so the restaurant needs to do some preparations before opening. If you don't mind, you can line up and wait for a while. The restaurant will officially open for business at 11:30 am. His actually refusing to let the judges have lunch in advance. The people who didn't know the restaurant's rules looked at Meg with astonishment. Someone would actually refuse City Lord Michael, Hill Buffett, Jeffrey, Novan, and Robert, and make them line up for lunch. This boss is too crazy, isn't he? Mr. Mack is indeed Mr. Mack. The regulars of the restaurant revealed a knowing look on their faces. The God of Fire and the Lord of Ice were always queuing up outside the restaurant. That's a very reasonable request. Then, let's wait for a while, Michael said with a smile. He stood up and walked to the restaurant's entrance. He stood in front of the door, and stood at the front of the line. As a father who had to accompany his daughter to the restaurant for spicy grilled fish every now and then, he also knew the restaurant's rules very well, and agreed that such rules brought convenience and comfort to the dining experience. Delicacies are worth the wait. Hill also walked over with his long legs, and stood 1 meter behind Michael. It's rare to have the chance to line up so close to the front. Seems like I made the right choice to come today. Robert stood behind Hill with a smile. If I remember correctly, you can line up twice. Principal Novan chuckled, and stood beside Michael. Jeffrey stood up, and was about to leave when Harris pulled him back with a smile. Jeffrey, don't run away. We haven't seen each other for years. Let's go and try my master's cooking, and have a few more drinks. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1491. Silly, children can't drink alcohol. Smell this soup. It's cooked with alcohol. It's not nice. Come, let me share your burden. Little fatty, stop eating. Look at your tummy. It's almost as big as that pot on your back. Master will help you drink this soup. Master is doing this for your own good. Slowly. You took so long just to drink a mouthful of soup. If you finish this bowl of soup, you'll lose half an hour of your life. Let Master bear the rest of the soup for you. Anyway, Master has already enjoyed everything. It doesn't matter if you waste a little of your life. Harris walked among his disciples, and cheated a few more bowls of Buddha jumps over the wall shamelessly. The crowd that had already started to line up looked at Harris, whose face was flushed red. There was a cloud of white fog above his head that didn't dissipate for a long time. His bald head was now covered with a layer of thin, short hair. Why is this Master a little different from what I imagined? Master, you seem to have drunk a little too much, the little disciple, Van reminded him softly. You're just a child, so you don't understand. This is the effect I want. However, Harris didn't seem to mind. He reached out to touch his head, and revealed a blissful smile. After so many years, he could finally have a head of smooth, silky hair again. He could return to being the most handsome chef in the world. The competition took a lot of time. We need to hurry up and prepare. Meg returned to the restaurant, and closed the door. He didn't have time to share the joy of winning, and quickly walked to the kitchen as he spoke. I will prepare the ingredients very quickly. Phyllis jogged to the kitchen. She took off her apron and put it on. She cleaned her hands, and immersed herself in preparing the ingredients. I can help to grind the tofu, Anna said. She had already learned how to operate the bin grinder. Everyone also immersed themselves in their work. To the restaurant, it was very important to open on time. Meg turned around, and said, "Oh, right. MIA, find that enlarged version of the menu and put it back at the restaurant's entrance." "All right." MIA found a folded, standing menu that was taller than a person from behind the counter. She opened the door, and stood at the entrance. She smiled, and reminded, "This is the restaurant's menu. First-time customers can understand it first. It will be more convenient to order later." After saying that, she returned to the restaurant. There was already a commotion behind her. The dishes on the menu are so expensive. A single dish can easily cost hundreds or thousands. Buddha jumps over the wall, 10,000 coins per serving. That line is too long. I heard that there's a fish restaurant that's not bad. Why don't we go there and try? Sure, I don't want to wait too long for a meal. When the menu was placed at the door, other than causing a commotion, it also had a good dissuading effect. At the same time, it also avoided the awkward situation of customers lining up for hours, only to enter the restaurant to take a look at the menu but wanting to leave. This Buddha jumps over the wall soup is actually selling for 10,000 copper coins per serving. Grand Master is really generous. 10,000 copper coins are not enough to measure the value of such a delicacy. I only drank a mouthful. Master drank the rest. I haven't even started drinking yet. Harris' disciples also looked at the menu with astonishment. They had traveled the continent and met many famous chefs with their master. They had also been to their restaurants. It wasn't that they had never seen expensive menus, but it was indeed their first time seeing a soup that was sold for 10,000 copper coins. Furthermore, they even drank it. This is such a worry-relieving miracle medicine. It's worth it even if it costs 100,000 or 1 million copper coins per bowl, let alone 10,000 copper coins. Harris took the towel from Chapman and wiped his wet head with emotion. Although he had a master at his age, his hair had grown back, and he hadn't been as happy as he was today for many years. There was a long line at Amy's in the afternoon as usual. Some of the regulars who came late could only sigh and leave when they saw the cut-off line at the end of the line. There are so many people today. Amy let go of Crassus's hand and skipped towards the entrance of the restaurant. She looked at the audience who hadn't left yet in shock. She thought for a while, and suddenly stopped in her tracks. She looked at the crowd curiously, and asked, "I heard that there was a little fool who wanted to challenge Father today. Was he beaten away by Father? What a cute half-elf girl. Is she the restaurant owner's daughter?" Many people's eyes lit up when they saw Amy. "Yes. This is the treasure of our restaurant, little boss, the invincible baby Amy," Harrison replied with a nod. "She looks so cute, and she speaks so adorably too. I want to steal her away," a strange uncle said as he clasped his chest. "You can try, but I have to remind you. Look at that half-bearded old man over there. He's the Lord of Fire, Crassus, little boss's master. Look at that magic potion shop over there. It's opened by the Lord of Ice, Julian. He's also little boss's master," Harrison said with a smile. "Ahem. I was just joking. Don't take it seriously. Don't take it seriously." Everyone was amused by Amy's words, but their gazes couldn't help but land on Harris. That little fool she was talking about was probably Harris. Ayo, what a cute little elf. She has to be of royal blood to give birth to such a beautiful little elf, right? Harris didn't blush at all when he was called a little fool by a cute little fellow. He looked at Amy with a smile and said, "Little girl, I can see that you have a good bone structure. You have good material to be a chef. I have here Scram. She's my disciple." Crassus lifted his leg and kicked Harris's butt. He angrily said, "Harris, you've grown up. You even dare to covet my disciple. Ayo." Harris jumped. He looked at Crassus with surprise and joy, and said, "Grandpa Crassus, why are you here, too? My disciple is here. If I'm not here, where am I?" Crassus said with pursed lips, "This beautiful little elf is your disciple?" Harris was a little surprised. He thought for a while, and said, "I'm her father's disciple now, and you're the master of her father's daughter. So, what should I call you?" Crassus thought for a while seriously, and then said, "Scram." "Oh, so that little fool who came to challenge Father is you." Amy looked at Harris in realization. "Little girl, we're in the same generation now. You can call me Little Harris," Harris said with a smile. "No, you'll pull down the average looks of us kids." Amy shook her head seriously. She thought for a while, and said, "Or perhaps you can call me Old Harris who just grew hair." Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1492. Harris held his breath as he looked at the serious Amy. He didn't know what expression he should show for a moment. He had just regrown his hair, and was about to have a second spring in his life. He didn't expect to encounter such a crisis in the blink of an eye. But looking at the little fellow, he just couldn't get angry. After some serious consideration, it was actually a little fitting. He suddenly felt a little aggrieved. "Phut. This nickname is a little cute. Ha ha ha, what a cute nickname. This little boss is so cute." The customers at the door couldn't help but be amused by Amy. "This little fellow is really cute." The Hill also looked at Amy with a smile. He had only seen this little girl occasionally when he came to the restaurant previously. She was very cute, and her personality was very interesting. But who could her mother be? To be able to give birth to such a beautiful little elf, her mother must be a very beautiful elf, right? The Hill thought curiously as a few pre-selected elves popped up in his mind. The first to be eliminated was Princess Irina. Although she was also very beautiful, she was Alex's official partner, after all. It was obviously impossible for her to be with Meg. As for the others, They were also eliminated by her one by one. There wasn't a particularly suitable candidate at that moment. Old Harris, who just regrown his hair. Bye. I'll go in first. Amy smiled and waved at Harris. She reached out to knock on the door, and then called out. The restaurant's door opened very quickly, and she went in. Not long later, she moved a small stool out with a steaming beggar's chicken drumstick in her hand. She let the aroma spread as she sat down on the steps. She raised the golden-skinned chicken drumstick in her hand and gestured to everyone. She smiled and said, "I have a drumstick to eat. Howl." As she said that, she opened her mouth wide and took a bite of the drumstick. A blissful smile appeared on her little face instantly. She sat on the stool and swayed slightly from side to side as if she was eating the most delicious food in the world. Gulp tilde, the sound of saliva being swallowed could be heard in the line. Everyone's expressions were helpless with a tinge of desolation. They had already suffered enough in the duel, and they didn't expect to suffer such a blow when they were lining up. "It's too difficult for me," Harrison said worriedly as he touched his stomach. Many guests nodded in agreement. Although watching Little Boss eat was a very appetizing thing, to the customers who had empty stomachs back then, it was simply torture. Meow tilde Ugly Duckling extended a little pink paw and placed it gently on Amy's leg as it looked at her expectantly. Amy looked down at Ugly Duckling and pondered for a moment before tearing off a small piece of chicken and feeding it. "All right, here's a small piece for you. Consider it your lunch today." Ugly Duckling, which had just accepted the chicken excitedly, was immediately taken aback. It looked up at Amy, and its eyes gradually widened. "Are you a demon? It's a diet meal. It's all like this. Be good," Amy said with a smile. Then, she continued to gnaw on the drumstick as if no one else was around. The envious customers all turned to look at Ugly Duckling with pity in their eyes. However, even though this kitten wasn't very big, it was indeed quite fat. It was almost as round as an orange ball. Lunch became a gathering for the seniors like Crassus, Harris, and Jeffrey. Meg naturally didn't have any objections to this. Anyway, someone was paying for it, so it wasn't against the rules. However, Meg didn't release the husband and wife lung slice at noon, nor did he make Buddha jumps over the wall, which still caused many customers to complain. The husband and wife lung slice is still being tested. It will be released officially at a suitable time, Meg replied uniformly. As for Buddha jumps over the wall, it was originally only available at night. After the lunch service ended, Meg walked to the door. Just as he was about to close the door, he saw Harris and his disciples still standing outside. "What are you guys doing?" Meg walked out of the door and looked at Harris with confusion. "We are respecting our master. We saw that master was busy just now, so we didn't come to the kitchen to bid you farewell," Harris said with a smile. "It's just a joke. Master Harris, you don't have to take it seriously. In terms of culinary skills, you are much better than me. In terms of experience, you are even a senior. I can't afford to be called master." Meg quickly waved his hands. He still knew his limits. If he were to really teach Harris how to cook, it would be no different from showing off in front of an expert. "That won't do. If you agree to a bet, you have to admit defeat. You won, so you should be my master." Harris shook his head. He looked at Meg with a serious expression, and said, "Although there is a hierarchy in cooking, every chef has his or her specialty. It doesn't mean that I'm better than other chefs just because I've been cooking for a longer time. That's not right. Every chef can be my teacher. I learned my culinary skills from them. And from you, I see many things that are worth learning. Hence, this isn't just a bet. I am sincerely seeking your guidance." Meg looked at Harris' serious expression, and suddenly thought of a tall great man. He cupped his hands, bowed slightly, and said, "Please give me your guidance, too." A smile appeared on Harris' face again. He looked at Meg, and asked, "I wonder when Master is going to teach me the dish husband and wife lung slice." "Tomorrow morning. I haven't had lunch with the restaurant staff yet," Meg said with a smile. "All right." Harris nodded, and then left with his disciples. Irina was holding a drumstick as she stood behind Meg, and smilingly asked, Do you feel a little smug after taking in a disciple who is twice your age? It's all right. It's a little strange. Meg turned to look at her, and smilingly said, I heard you bet a lot of money on me today. Irina's eyes lit up, and she smilingly said, I would have forgotten if you didn't mention it. I still have to bring people to collect the money later. I wonder if those gambling dens have prepared the money. I bet $300 million on you. Oh, $300 million. Meg secretly clicked his tongue. Luckily, he didn't bet on himself. Otherwise, those gambling dens bosses would cry their eyes out. He smilingly said, someone who dares to go back on his words shouldn't have been born yet. It's good that they have such awareness. Otherwise, it wouldn't be good to make a move when we just arrived at their territory. Let's eat. Everyone is hungry. Meg closed the restaurant's door and walked to the table that was already filled with dishes with Irina. They were too busy in the morning, so lunchtime was pushed back to after business hours. After lunch, Irina brought Phyllis out to collect the money. Phyllis followed behind Irina and nervously asked, Princess, it's my first time collecting money. How can I make myself look more professional? Make it fiercer, Irina casually replied. Fiercer? Irina stopped in her tracks and turned to look at Phyllis. Come, make a fiercer expression for me. Phyllis squeezed out an expression for a long time and finally said aggrievedly, I don't know how. Irina held her chin and thought for a while as she stared at Phyllis. She said, just imagine that someone killed me, and you're going to take revenge on her now. Sob, sob, sob. Princess, don't die, Irina. Chapter 1493. After confirming that Phyllis wasn't up to the task, Irina had no choice but to let her play the role of an attendant and lead her into the first casino. In the bustling casino, gamblers of all races gathered at the gambling tables. Chaos City's unique environment allowed the casino to gather all kinds of gambling methods from all races. After many years of continuous improvement, the gambling methods had become more and more complete, and the casino was full almost every day. Is this the casino, Princess? It's so scary. Phyllis followed closely behind Irina, and a hint of fear appeared on her face as she looked at the gamblers who were blushing and shouting loudly. They're just a bunch of useless gamblers. What's there to be afraid of? They're not even as fierce as the biting rabbits in the wind forest after they leave the gambling table, Irina said with a relaxed smile. When did the rabbits in the wind forest start biting people? Phyllis was a little surprised. When they're in a hurry, Irina said calmly as she walked straight to the front desk of the casino. She slammed her hand on the counter and said to the demon in charge of the casino, I'm here to exchange my money. The demon was initially dozing off, but he was given a fright by the loud slap on the table. He turned around with an enraged expression, and his eyes gradually lit up. What a beautiful elf! He had never seen such a beautiful elf in Chaos City, and he was momentarily stunned by her beauty. Exchange my money, Irina repeated in a cold voice. Only then did the demon come back to his senses. He didn't think that this beautiful elf would come to the casino to gamble, and it seemed that she had won. He just didn't know how many copper coins she had won. He chuckled and picked up the gambling coupon on the table to take a look, and his eyes widened. He carefully counted the number of zeros behind the 3 twice, and made sure that the bet was 30 million copper coins. The demon looked at Irina again, and immediately stood up with the gambling coupon. He pushed open the door behind him, and ran in. As he ran, he yelled, Boss, the person who bet 30 million copper coins is here. Why does he seem a little scared of you, Princess? Phyllis looked at the door slowly closing, and was a little perplexed. They're not afraid of me. They're just afraid of losing money, Irina said with a smile. She casually glanced at the betting table at the side and the sexy dealer who was shaking the dice online. Then, she took out a Buffett Bank banknote worth 1 million copper coins and handed it to Phyllis. Go and put this banknote on the 18 o'clock position on that table, she said. Go and put this banknote on that table. Phyllis took the banknote with both hands. Glancing at the gambling table full of people and then glancing at Irina who had no intention of changing her mind, Phyllis had no choice but to force her way in. She then slammed the banknote heavily on the 18 points area. The dealer, who was about to open the dice cup, was stunned. The expectant gamblers were also stunned as they looked at Phyllis. What was this thin and weak elven girl trying to do? Was he here to cause trouble? Sorry, there were too many people, so I accidentally slapped a little too hard. Phyllis panicked when she was stared at by the crowd. She retracted her hand apologetically and revealed the banknote that she had slapped alone on the 18 o'clock area. 1,000,000 copper coins. There was an uproar in the crowd. Although it was not uncommon to see rich people casually throw out millions of gold coins in this gambling house, such a little girl dared to take out 1,000,000 to bet on the lowest probability of 18 o'clock. Even the veteran gamblers who had been in the casino for many years had never seen such a posture. "Did your hand slip?" the dealer asked subconsciously. It was not that the 18 o'clock had not been opened before, but the dice in the casino were specially made, and the number of times they could roll 18 o'clock every day was very limited. After all, 18 o'clock meant that the bet would be 20 times higher. It was inevitable that some gamblers would recklessly bet on 18 o'clock, which was not a good thing for the casino. No, I want to bet on this." Phyllis hurriedly shook her head. She did not know why the princess wanted her to bet on this, nor did she know what it meant. However, since the princess said it was this, then it must be this. Seeing that the crowd's expression was a little strange, she asked again, "Can't I bet on this?" "It's not that you can't. You're a customer, so you can bet wherever you want," the dealer hurriedly said. This was a performance of 1,000,000, which was equivalent to the turnover of this table in the morning. Since such a rich and stupid rabbit had come to the door, there was no reason to let her go. The gamblers looked at Phyllis as if they were looking at a fool. They had been playing here for the whole morning, and they had not seen an 18 o'clock even once. Everyone felt a little distressed when they saw that 1,000,000 had gone down the drain. "All right, place your bets. After the countdown of 5, the score will be revealed." The dealer gestured for everyone to take half a step back from the gambling table, and then began to count down. 5, 4, 12 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 8 o'clock. The gamblers stared at the dice cup with shining eyes and began to shout the number of points they had bet on. It was as if as long as they shouted loudly enough, the god of luck would come to them. Phyllis was so scared that she shrank to the side and looked at those crazy gamblers with some confusion. She did not know why they were so crazy. 2, 1. The dealer opened the dice cup, and everyone's eyes fell on the 3 dice in the cup. 6, 6, 6, 18 o'clock. The gamblers were silent for a moment before they burst into an uproar. They stared at the 3 dice in the dice cup in disbelief. All 3 of them had turned into 6, and they were all dumbfounded. Not to mention that 18 o'clock was very rare. The key was that the little girl had just bet 1,000,000 on it, which meant that she would get 20,000,000 copper coins in return for this round. 20,000,000 copper coins. Many gamblers' eyes turned green. They had been playing here for the whole morning, and many people had tried to bet over 18 o'clock, but they did not expect to be bet on by a little girl who did not seem to know anything. The dealer's expression was a little unnatural. After being a dealer for so many years, this was the first time he had seen a customer who bet 18,000,000 copper coins in the first round and actually won. Phyllis looked at the 3 dice in shock for a while. Seeing that the crowd's reaction was a little exaggerated, she carefully said, "If I didn't count wrongly, I won, right?" "Yes, according to the rules, you will get 20,000,000 copper coins." The dealer nodded with a bitter smile. This month's commission was over. "Then," he said, "because the amount is too big, please come with me to settle the bill." "Oh." Phyllis followed behind the dealer in a daze. When she squeezed out of the crowd, she did not forget to turn back and apologize to the gamblers whose eyes were glowing with greed. "Sorry, I don't know how to play this. You can continue." "Phut." The gamblers vomited blood. How could she be so infuriating? A beautiful elf. The demon casino owner took the gambling coupon and walked out aggressively with 5 or 6 tall and strong demon brothers. He wanted to see who had earned 60,000,000 copper coins from him. If it was a scam, don't blame him for not being polite. He reached out and pushed the door open. "Boss, This customer just bet 18 o'clock on the dice. You need to pay her 20 million copper coins, the dealer said quickly when he saw the demon boss pushing the door open aggressively. Chapter 1494. 20 million. The demon boss voice was a little stuttered. It wasn't that he couldn't afford to lose, but to be able to win 20 million just by playing dice, and to hit the mark of 18 at that, wasn't this a little too unreasonable? His gaze landed on Phyllis in a flash, sweeping over her like a vicious wolf's gaze. A young elf who looked no more than 13 or 14 years old. Her strength was low, and there was no way she could see through the dice cup. However, 18 wasn't something that could be guessed so easily. To have guessed correctly on the first round, and even bet a million, as an old hand, he clearly knew the tricks hidden here. Daring to play games in his place, they really didn't take him, Beecher, seriously. She's the one who brought the gambling coupon? Beecher's voice was cold as he asked the demon who'd just delivered the news. The few demons who'd followed Beecher out had already spread out and surrounded Phyllis, their expressions a little unfriendly. What do you want to do? Phyllis said a little frantically, her gaze instinctively looking outside. I brought the coupon, and the elf is also mine. Is there a problem? Just then, a cold voice rang out. Irina walked forward and looked at Beecher with a somewhat mocking smile. What? Thinking of reneging on your debt? Someone's causing trouble? Quite a few gamblers looked over curiously when they heard the voice. They weren't the least bit afraid of things blowing up. The two demons blocking in front of Beecher stepped aside, clenching their fists and looking at Irina with unfriendly expressions. They were in charge of holding down the fort, and if anyone dared to cause trouble, they'd teach them a lesson with their iron fists. Beecher turned around and couldn't help but start when his gaze landed on Irina. What a beautiful elf, but what made him even more surprised was that this elf looked vaguely familiar, as if he'd seen her somewhere before, but he just couldn't recall where at the moment. However, Beecher was certain that this elf wasn't on the same level as the little elf over there. He immediately revealed a smile and said, "This guest must be joking. Our gambling house values integrity the most, how could we renege on our debt? However, this wager is a little large, and as the boss, I must also conduct a simple verification. After I've confirmed, I'll hand over the wager in full to you." Gambling houses relied on enough integrity to operate, and if this signboard fell, then there would be no gamblers coming to gamble in the future. The gambling coupon is your casino's, the table and dice are also yours. What more is there to verify? Verify whose fist is harder? Irina glanced at her delicately manicured fingernails and said with some mockery. Irritation flashed through Beecher's tea. This way, but he still smiled as he said, "This way, please, let's go to the VIP area to talk in detail. I still have a lot of gambling houses to collect money from. Either you give me the money now, or you give me the money after I tear down your gambling house." Irina casually picked up a chair, and one of its legs dragged on the ground as she walked toward Berkey. A hint of joy flashed through Beecher's eyes. He had originally been thinking about how to resolve this matter, but he hadn't expected the other party to start stirring up trouble first. He immediately said seriously, "It looks like this guest isn't here to exchange for gambling capital, but to cause trouble. Since that's the case, in order to ensure the rights and interests of the other guests, I can only, bang, Beecher." Beecher hadn't even finished speaking when the demon bodyguards beside him were all swatted away like flies, including 2 7th-grade demons. Beecher gulped as he looked at the new holes in the ceiling of the casino. He retracted his gaze, and that beautiful face appeared before him, along with that chair that was on the verge of falling apart. Irina. Beecher's meridians were instantly cleared, and a name subconsciously popped up in his mind. Thud. Beecher's legs went soft, and he knelt directly in front of Irina, shouting at the same time, "Princess, spare me. Money, Bam. With a crisp sound, the chair fell apart into sawdust that filled the air. Beecher was also sent flying with the sound, embedding himself in the wall on the other side of the casino. The gamblers were dumbfounded, not knowing what was going on. How had the casino's boss been sent flying with a slap? What was this elf's background? Was she so unreasonable? Hey, what did he just say? Irina asked. I think he said he'd pay. Phyllis whispered, glancing at Beecher a little pitifully. What an unexpected lack of backbone. Irina casually tossed away the remaining half of the wooden stick in her hand, then looked at Beecher, who was hanging on the wall with half a swollen face and an aggrieved expression, and said, "Be more straightforward next time." Beecher had been plucked from the wall. He covered his swollen face and said in a muffled voice, "Hurry. Hurry and give the money to the princess, hurry." Very quickly, Beecher respectfully presented a banknote worth 120 million copper coins with both hands. Irina took the banknote and casually glanced at it, then looked at Beecher with a smile and said, "The chair's not bad." With that, Irina led Irina away. The crowd of gamblers quietly watched her leave, and only when she disappeared through the door did they gradually become restless. "Boss, who is she?" The demon who reported the news earlier asked in a daze as he covered the half of his face that had lost a few teeth. "Who else could it be?" "That's Princess Irina, you dumb cunt." Beecher kicked that demon to the ground and covered his face with his hands. He wanted to cry but had no tears. What could he do? He was also in despair. Anyone who met her would be terrified. Princess Irina. Everyone was enlightened and surprised. Indeed, no one dared to provoke that legendary big sister. What surprised them was that she actually bet on that culinary duel. Very soon, the news of Princess Irina massacring the top 10 gambling dens in Chaos City spread all over Chaos City. However, the top 10 gambling dens quickly came out personally to clarify the matter. They denied the fact that they were massacred, and congratulated Irina for winning the grand prize. Therefore, Chaos City soon knew that Irina had won 800 million by betting on the culinary duel between the boss of Mammoth and the invincible god of cookery, Harris. "You're the real business prodigy." Meg glanced at Amy, who was happily helping to count the banknotes, and praised Irina, who was sitting at the side eating her pizza elegantly. He also knew that the 300 million was taken from the Demon Island's 10 Kings Palace. Of course. After all, I'm an elf who can earn 100 million just by letting vampires eat grass. Irina said matter-of-factly. She pondered for a while, and then said, "Now that he has become a progenitor, if he performs again, the ticket price will increase by 10 times. Won't the venue be packed to the brim?" "Probably." Meg nodded with a weird expression. He sighed silently for that progenitor of vampires who had just become a progenitor. Chapter 1495. Mother, I think you can bring me along when you collect money next time. I'm super fierce. Amy turned around with a bunch of banknotes in her hand. She clenched her little fist and placed it beside her face as she howled super fiercely. "Millimeter. That's not a bad idea." Irina nodded seriously. Meg held back his laughter. He felt a little helpless. The little one's howl would probably make those gamblers cry. As for the debt collection effect, it would most likely be negative. The duel between Meg and Harris was like a small stone that was thrown into the peaceful life of Chaos City. It stirred up some waves, and became the topic of many people's after-dinner conversations. Meanwhile, the direct impact it brought was that the number of customers who came because of the news increased tremendously. There was already a long queue at the entrance. The restaurant's old customers spontaneously explained the restaurant's rules to the new customers, and maintained the order of the queue. Some customers who tried to break the rules and cut the queue to enter the restaurant in advance became much more obedient after being taught a lesson. The queue at the entrance was still very orderly. Due to Amy's, the barren southwest corner of Aiden Square became increasingly prosperous. A few new restaurants opened along the street. Although they couldn't be compared to Mammoth, they still diverted many customers who couldn't afford the high price and couldn't get in the queue because of Mammoth's popularity. "Boss, when will our restaurant be as popular as theirs?" A waiter from a newly opened barbecue restaurant leaned against the door frame as he looked at the long queue at Mammoth with envy. "Wait till we poach their boss over." That boss shrugged. There wouldn't be a second restaurant in Chaos City with such a long queue. "I heard the restaurant next door is also planning to make hot pot." The waiter's gaze landed on the restaurant that was under renovation next door. They are really riding on the popularity. I wonder how much of the essence of hot pot they can make, that boss said with a smile. The boss said with a smile. He turned around and glanced at the 2 or 3 tables of customers sitting in his restaurant. He also began to consider the feasibility of changing his restaurant into a hot pot restaurant. Currently, there were already a few restaurants in the Aden Square that were imitating Mammis products and making their main dishes. The restaurants that were able to imitate Mammis products were doing quite well. It was as if they were making a low-quality version of Mammis products, and the prices were more affordable, which attracted many customers to try the new products. As for the hot pot restaurant, this seemed to be the first one. Miss Rayner, right? Hello, I'm Bennett, the owner of Zebra Hot Pot Restaurant. A balding middle-aged man stopped Rena, who was walking towards the dormitory with a basket of vegetables. He politely took off his hat, and smilingly said, "Can I have a few minutes of your time for a chat?" Rayner was a little surprised that he knew her name. At the same time, she was a little puzzled as to when there was a new Zebra Hot Pot restaurant in Chaos City. However, he was an elder, after all. She stopped in her tracks, and said, "Please go ahead." Bennett pointed to the resplendent tea room not far away, and said, "That tea room over there is also mine. If Miss Rayner doesn't mind, perhaps we can go there and have a cup of hot tea while we talk." "No, thank you. I've sent the groceries home to cook for my mother, and I have to go to work at the restaurant immediately. If you have anything to talk to me about, we can talk here," Rena rejected. A hint of disappointment flashed across Bennett's eyes. However, he continued to smile, and said, "If that's the case, then let's talk here. Actually, I'm here to look for Miss Rayner to invite you to be the manager and partner of Zebra Hot Pot Restaurant." Manager? Partner? Rayner looked at Bennett perplexedly. Bennett nodded sincerely, and said, "Yes. I hope to invite you to be in charge of the operation and management of Zebra Hot Pot Restaurant. You can make use of your superb hot pot skills to make Zebra Hot Pot Restaurant the best hot pot restaurant in Chaos City. Furthermore, you don't have to invest any capital, and you can get 30% of the hot pot restaurant's ownership and profits directly. You can become the hot pot restaurant's partner." Rayner was slightly taken aback. She understood what Bennett meant, and shook her head without much thought. "I'm sorry. I'm already working at Amy's now, and I'm not considering changing jobs. If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave first." "Wait a minute." Bennett quickly called out to Rayner. He looked at her, and continued, "If Miss Rayner agrees, you will be given an additional detached house in the city center in the wealthy district. After the hot pot restaurant operates normally, you will be able to earn hundreds of thousands of copper coins in profits every month. This money will allow you to live the life of a wealthy person in Chaos City. It's not as bad as working hard at that restaurant and only earning a few thousand copper coins a month. How does that sound? Managing a restaurant on her own, a detached house in the wealthy district, and a monthly salary of hundreds of thousands of copper coins. To be honest, this was indeed very attractive. After all, Rayner's current goal was to save up money and buy a small house in Chaos City that belonged to her and her mother as soon as possible so that they could have a stable home. Now, all she needed to do was nod her head, and she could have all this easily, and change the course of her life completely. "I'm sorry, but I'm still willing to stay and work at Amy's. All my knowledge and skills about hot pot were taught to me by Mr. Mack. I owe him a debt of gratitude. Goodbye." Rayner shook her head without hesitation, and then walked past Bennett with her basket. "I will give Miss Rayner some time to consider. If you have thought it through, you can come to the tea room in front to look for me," Bennett said as he looked at Rayner's back. Rayner quickened her pace, but didn't reply. She's really a good girl who knows how to repay kindness. Bennett watched as Runa's voice disappeared at the entrance of the alley, and his brows furrowed slightly. After a while, they relaxed slowly, and he smilingly said, "However, I won't give up so easily. Rayner, why do you look like you have something on your mind?" Karen's walked into the kitchen and turned off the tap. She glanced at the water that was almost overflowing from the sink, and asked Rayner, who was holding a vegetable in her hand. "Nothing. I'm just a little distracted. Raina hurriedly shook her head and lowered her head to continue washing the vegetables. Karen stroked Raina's head with heartache and said, "You must be too tired. You don't have to come home to cook for me in the future. I'm all better now, and I can take care of myself. It's all right. The restaurant is so close to the dormitory, and I'll be home in no time. Also, my colleagues all go to the ice cream shop downstairs to do their work. I often come back with them, so I'm not tired at all." Raina smiled and shook her head. She looked at Karen's and said, "Mother, I like to come home to cook for you. If you don't let me do it, I'll be sad." All right, all right, all right. I'll let you do it, I'll let you do it." Karen smiled helplessly. She knew that this girl was very filial and would definitely be worried about her cooking for herself. After cooking for Karen's, Raina casually ate a few mouthfuls and set off for the restaurant. "Raina, I've prepared all the ingredients for the hot pot tonight. See if there's anything else you need to add," Phyllis said to Raina as soon as she walked into the kitchen. "Let me do a check." Raina took her apron and put it on, and quickly got back to work. Chapter 1496. It's time to eat. Meg took out the last dish, the spicy grilled fish, from the oven, and smiled at everyone who was busy in the kitchen. "It's going to be very busy tonight, so everyone should eat more," Meg said to everyone with a smile as he placed a piece of fish into Amy's bowl. "Thank you, Father." Amy was elated as she poked at the fish with her chopsticks. She brought her mouth to the edge of the bowl and carefully blew on the fish before shoving it directly into her mouth. "Ah! It's so delicious," Amy exclaimed with a blissful smile on her little face. Everyone also picked up their chopsticks. Aside from filling their stomachs, the table of delicious food also provided them with an unparalleled experience. Furthermore, it provided them with enough energy for the upcoming work. This was probably the happiest time of the day. Raina ate her food in small bites as she watched everyone enjoy the delicacies and tease her occasionally. She couldn't help but smile at the joyous scene. Even though the work intensity was not low, the happiness and satisfaction of working at Immerse was completely incomparable to that of her previous jobs. Furthermore, she had received a lot of respect here. After dinner, the busy and long evening business hours began. Immerse designated hot pot area had already become an existence that was on par with the restaurant's popularity. On a cold winter day, there was probably nothing more blissful than sitting around a warm hot pot with 2 or 3 friends. Raina was in charge of the designated hot pot area, and she busied herself in front of the pot for almost the entire night. Pot after pot of hot pot soup was prepared by her hands before being served to each table, becoming the source of delicious hot pot flavor. During her free time, Raina leaned against the wall and wiped the sweat from her forehead with a towel. She then opened her thermos and took a few sips of water. Her gaze fell on Meg, who was still busy in front of the stove. There were 3 iron pots, 2 stew pots, and all kinds of kitchen utensils surrounding him. Furthermore, there was food cooking in each of the pots. He was like a god, easily moving between the various woks. His movements were natural and smooth, making people feel that he was not in a hurry at all. Instead, it was as if they were enjoying a wonderful cooking show. The customer at the new table asked for a portion of insanely spicy. The other table already has 2 portions of clear soup, 3 portions of medium spicy, 3 portions of super spicy, and 1 portion of insanely spicy. Yarbemia walked into the kitchen and said to Raina, who was in a daze, "Oh, okay." Raina immediately put down the cup and went back to work. At 9 o'clock in the evening, the opening hours ended and the guests left. "Thank you for your hard work tonight. I have prepared a fat set meal for everyone, durian pizza plus beggar's chicken. Have some supper before going home to sleep." Meg walked out of the kitchen with a tray and smiled at the people who were cleaning up the dining room. "Boss, if I eat supper every night, I think I will get fat very quickly." Yarbemia rubbed her stomach and was a little distressed. "Yeah, I think I am already getting fat. Do you see my face getting rounder?" Connie reached out and poked her face, revealing a small dimple. When everyone saw that she had indeed become a little rounder, they couldn't help but smile a little. "You look quite cute," Meg said with a smile. The sinful supper was finished in the midst of everyone's disdainful laughter. Everyone bid farewell and left. "Good night, see you tomorrow." Raina said goodbye to Mia and the others, took out the key, and opened the door softly. The lights in the room were still on. Karen's was sitting at the table, sewing a piece of clothing seriously. There was a basket of clothes by her feet. "Mother, didn't I tell you to rest early? Why are you still sewing?" Raina closed the door and looked at Karen's with some helplessness and heartache. "I couldn't sleep, so I thought I might as well do something to kill time and wait for you to come back." Karen's tied a knot and broke it with her teeth. She turned around and smiled as she pointed at a small square wooden box on the table. "Someone just sent this wooden box over. He said it was from your friend, Shanshan." Raina walked to the table and reached out to pick up the exquisite brown wooden box that was slightly bigger than her palm. It was a little heavy. She had been too busy recently and had only seen Shanshan once in the dining room. Besides the people in the dining room, Shanshan was her only friend. She didn't think too much about it and opened the box. "It's not Shanshan. It's a middle-aged man. He left after putting it down." Karen's gaze landed on the box in Raina's hand. "Middle-aged man?" Raina's hand froze, but the box had already been opened. A dazzling golden light bloomed from the box. In the box, a golden bracelet inlaid with jasper shone brightly under the light. What is this? Who gave you such a valuable gift?" Carla stepped forward and looked at the shiny bracelet in the box. The golden light flowed on the piece of jasper inlaid on the bracelet, like flowing waves. Under the bracelet, there was a silver note with 100,000 copper coins written on it. This. Rena already knew who the box was from. She quickly closed the lid and placed the box back on the table. She awkwardly said, "Someone I'm not familiar with gave it to me. I will return it tomorrow." "Mother, you don't have to worry." Karen's looked at Raina, who was dodging her eyes, and then looked at the wooden box on the table. She sat down at the table and looked a little serious. "Raina, are you hiding something from me? Who is that man? Why did he give you such a valuable gift?" "Mother." Raina looked at Karen's and met her stern eyes. She hesitated and said, "He is the owner of a hot pot restaurant. I met him on the way back this evening. He asked me to be the manager of his hot pot restaurant. He said that as long as I agreed, he would give us a house in the wealthy district and 30% of the ownership of the restaurant." "How did you reply to him?" Karen's expression did not change because of the generous promise. She still asked sternly. "I refused him," Raina replied quickly. Karen's expression eased a little. She pointed to the wooden box and asked, "What about this?" "I don't know why he gave me such a valuable gift after I refused, but I will return it tomorrow morning." Raina shook her head. It was the first time she had seen such a valuable gift. And the silver note of 100,000 was a huge amount of money she had never owned before. "You did the right thing, child. We can't accept this money and gift." Karen's nodded and said with some relief. "But if you agree to him, you won't have to work so hard to sew clothes anymore." Raina looked at Karen's with some heartache. "If you go to his restaurant, then what will you do? Rely on the hot pot that Mr. Meg taught you to make money for him? What's the difference between that and stealing?" Karen's looked at Raina and said in a low voice, "We can be poor, but we can't lose our principles and bottom line. We can't do things against our conscience. No matter how much money we get, I will never use a single copper coin." "Mother, I understand." Raina's eyes gradually became clear and firm. She reached out and picked up the wooden box from the table. "I will return the box now and make things clear to him." After saying that, she turned and walked out of the door. Chapter 1497. It's so late. Where is Raina going? Yarbemia asked curiously as she stood on the roof and looked down at Raina, who was wearing a down jacket. "Maybe she has something to do." Elizabeth also lowered her head to take a look, and her gaze paused briefly on the exquisite wooden box in Rena's hands. It's not safe to go out so late at night. Should we go with her? Yarbemia asked worriedly. They had changed their clothes and were preparing to head out of the city to practice their flying skills. Maybe she has something she needs to do, Elizabeth said as she looked at Raina, who had already disappeared around the corner of the stairs. She thought for a moment and said, maybe we can protect her from afar. Okay. Let's see where she's going first. Yarbemia nodded. She walked lightly to the other side of the roof and saw Raina walk out of the alley. She walked along the street and stopped in front of a tea house about 100 meters away from the ice cream shop. She seemed to hesitate for a moment before knocking on the door. After a while, the door of the tea house opened. A waiter in black walked out and exchanged a few words with Raina before inviting her into the tea house. Raina is going to drink tea so late at night. I feel so full from the supper just now, Yarbemia said in surprise. Maybe she's not going to drink tea. Maybe she's going to meet someone. Elizabeth shook her head. She narrowed her eyes as she looked at the tea house. She could sense some powerful auras from there. It looked like an ordinary tea house, but there were 2 7th-tier auras. It was obvious that this tea house wasn't simple. Raina is going to meet someone of her own accord. Do we need to interfere? Yarbemia was a little conflicted. Wait here. I'll go take a look, Elizabeth said. She tapped her feet lightly and flew towards the tea house. She felt that Raina's expression wasn't too good. It didn't seem like she was going to meet someone she was looking forward to. That tea house was a little strange. She was a little confused as to why Raina was going there at this time. Raina, miss, I didn't expect you to come so late. In the magnificent tea room, Bennett sat in front of the stove that was boiling tea, and got up with a smile as he spoke to Raina, who had followed the attendant into the room. The charcoal stove made the tea house very warm, and the pleasant smell of tea slowly drifted out from the teapot. My apologies for bothering you so late at night. Raina bowed slightly, then went forward to place the exquisite wooden box on the coffee table. She took 2 steps back, looked at Bennett, and went straight to the point. I can't accept such a precious gift. I'll express my decision to you once again. I won't leave Amy's to be the manager of your hot pot restaurant, nor will I use the hot pot skills that Mr. Meg created and taught me to serve other restaurants. After saying that, Raina felt much more relaxed. The distracting thoughts that had been circling in her mind were also cleared. She nodded slightly at Bennett, and then turned around to leave. Miss Raina, you might lose something important if you don't accept this gift, Miss Raina. Bennett stopped smiling, sat back in his seat, and crossed his legs. He looked at Raina's back as he spoke coldly. Raina stopped in her tracks, and tried her best to sound calm as she said, "This is Chaos City. It's a city of law. Even if it's a city of law, there's still darkness, isn't there? You should know this very well." Bennett's lips curled into a mocking smile. Raina clenched her fists subconsciously. She had been living in the slums for the past 10-odd years, and knew very well that no matter how bright a place was, there would always be places where light couldn't shine. Accept this greeting gift, and you'll get everything. But if you walk out of this door empty-handed, you might lose the most precious thing. Bennett picked up the teacup, and stroked the edge of the cup gently with his fingertips before suddenly letting go. Smack! With a crisp sound, the teacup shattered, and tea splashed everywhere. What a nice teacup. Although it's a little old, it could have been used for a long time, Bennett said regretfully, but there was still a smile on his face. Raina's body was trembling slightly. There was no way she wouldn't understand such a blatant threat. She was just an ordinary girl from the slums. She had been relying on her mother since she was young, and was just trying her best to survive. In the past, her biggest wish was to cure her mother's illness. Now that her mother's illness had been cured by Mr. Meg, she just wanted to live a good life with her mother, and let her lead a comfortable life. Her gaze landed on that box, but her mother's stern expression quickly surfaced in her mind. She clenched her teeth, and said, "I refuse." After saying that, she quickly walked to the entrance of the tea room. Bennett picked up the teapot, and slowly filled another teacup with water as he coldly said, "I will give you 3 days to consider. If you change your mind, you can come back and look for me anytime. All the conditions will be the same as before." Raina quickened her footsteps, and almost ran out of the tea room. After running for dozens of meters, Raina bent over and panted heavily. She turned back to look at that tea room. Under the splendid decorations, it was like a terrifying beast was staring at her with bloodshot eyes. What should I do? What should I do? Raina's tears kept flowing down her face as she stood by the street helplessly. She couldn't force herself to accept everything that person said against her will, but she also didn't have the ability to protect her mother. Bennett's threat and the sound of the teacup shattering kept echoing in her mind. It was like a curse that was strangling her throat, making her feel so helpless that she wanted to cry. What's wrong with Raina? Yarbemia, who was standing on the roof, saw Raina, who was squatting on the street, trembling and crying. She hurriedly jumped down from the roof and walked forward quickly. She looked at Raina with concern and said, "Raina, what's wrong? Are you all right?" Raina looked up when she heard her voice. She saw Yarbemia's concerned face and finally couldn't hold it in anymore. She threw herself into Yarbemia's arms and cried. In the tea room, two men walked out from behind the screen. One of them, a tall and thin man, smiled and said, "Why don't you be more direct? You just have to scare a little girl like her with a knife, and I guarantee that she'll be willing to do anything. She'll even be obedient. I want her to help me open a restaurant to earn money. If I push her too far, it might have the opposite effect. It's enough to let her understand some things." Bennett shook his head with a smile. "As long as she's willing to hand over all the recipes, we can open up hot pot restaurants all over the Norland continent. This is a very profitable business." The two men's eyes lit up when they heard that. "Will Amy's come out to mess things up? I heard that they've been in the limelight recently," the other short and fat man said. "He's just a chef with no roots in Chaos City. Although he managed to hook up with those two magic casters because of his daughter, as long as we keep our hands clean, even the Grey Temple can't do anything to us." Bennett smiled with disdain. "Wonderful bookhouse." Chapter 1498. What a disgusting and dirty deal. Why are these disgusting maggots still living in this world? Elizabeth raised her hand slowly, and the surrounding temperature began to drop. Right at this moment, she suddenly turned to look in the northwest direction. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she hesitated for a moment before putting her hand down slowly. She snorted softly, and disappeared from the tea house. There were two 7th-tier powerhouses in the tea house. If she wanted to kill all three of them at the same time, she would have to give it her all. Meanwhile, she sensed an 8th-tier aura moving in the distance. It should be a patrol officer from the Grey Temple. She still wanted to stay in Chaos City and accompany MIA as she grew up. If she acted rashly, she might not be able to stay in Chaos City any longer. Perhaps he's more suitable to deal with this kind of thing. Although he's not powerful enough, he has a lot of tricks up his sleeve, Elizabeth murmured to herself. The first person that came to her mind was Meg. "Raina, are you all right? Did someone bully you?" Yarbemia asked as she patted Raina's back gently. This was the first time she had seen Raina cry so sadly. She couldn't help but feel a little anxious. I'm fine. I'm just in a bad mood. I feel much better after crying." Raina gradually calmed down and withdrew from Yarbemia's arms. She took 2 steps back and looked at Mia's clothes that were stained by her tears. She was a little embarrassed as she said, "I'm sorry, MIA. I made you worry. It's all right. We're friends." MIA shook her head. She felt that Raina wasn't just in a bad mood. She had seen her run out of that tea house and then become like this. However, since Raina didn't want to talk about it, she didn't pursue the matter. "It's so cold outside. Why don't I send you back? I just came out of the city to practice flying," MIA continued. "It's all right. I can go back by myself. It's just downstairs anyway." Raina wiped her tears and squeezed out a smile on her red face. She shook her head and said, "Go practice flying. I'll go back first. Otherwise, my mother will be worried." Raina waved goodbye to Yarbemia, turned around, and walked towards the house. That guy was too dangerous. She didn't want to put Mia and the others in danger because of her. Elizabeth appeared beside Yarbemia and said softly, "Let's go out of the city." "But Raina," "I'll tell you on the way." A huge snowflake appeared under Elizabeth's feet, and with a flash of blue light, the two of them disappeared. In other words, someone threatened Raina to leave Amy's and open a hot pot restaurant for him. Raina didn't agree, so he used Raina's mother as a threat. Yarbemia looked at Elizabeth in surprise. "Yes." Elizabeth nodded. Yarbemia thought seriously for a while before asking, Then how should we help her?" "I wanted to kill them all." Kill them? No." Phew. Yarbemia heaved a sigh of relief before reminding, "Killing is a very serious crime in Chaos City." "They didn't think so." Elizabeth shook her head. Seeing Yarbemia's worried face, she added, "But I don't intend to kill them. Maybe we can let Boss handle this. He always has a good idea." Yarbemia's eyes lit up. "All right." Elizabeth nodded calmly. "Raina, what's wrong with you? Did that guy bully you?" Clarence asked nervously as she grabbed Rena's hand when she opened the door and saw that her eyes were red as if she had just cried. "No, it's just too cold outside. It's so cold that I'm about to cry." Raina shook her head and rubbed her hands together exaggeratedly. She stomped her feet and closed the door with a smile. "It's still warmer at home." "Silly child." Karen smiled, and then caringly asked, "Have you returned the things to them?" I've returned them." Raina nodded. Bennett's ever-changing face appeared in her mind, and she clenched her fists uncontrollably as fear engulfed her. "It's good that you've returned them. It's good that you've returned them." Karen smiled with relief. She looked at Raina and said, "I don't want to be rich in this life. As long as I can see you living happily with a clear conscience, I'll be happy." Raina responded softly as tears welled up in her eyes again. She walked sideways to the washroom and said, "Mother, I'm a little tired. I intend to take a hot bath and sleep. You can go and rest first." "All right. I'll place your pajamas at the door." The next morning, Raina went out, and happened to bump into Mia and the rest, who were also going out. "Good morning, Raina." Mia greeted her with a smile. Then, she naturally held her hand, and said with a smile, "You're very beautiful today, too." Raina looked at Mia's energetic smile, and her gloomy heart also warmed up a little. She smiled and agreed. She then greeted Elizabeth and the rest, and the few of them went to the restaurant together. When they walked to the entrance of the alley, Raina instinctively turned back to look at the tea house named Ben, and couldn't help but shiver. "It seems to be even colder today." Yarbemia's warm hand grabbed Raina's cold hand, and smiled. "Raina, can we eat the spicy hot pot you made tonight? I feel like it's super suitable for hot pot today." "I think so," Barbara agreed. "Me too." Connie raised her hand. Me too," Jane chimed in. "Can't we eat it in the morning?" Elizabeth asked doubtfully. Everyone was stunned for a moment, and then laughed at the same time. A smile also appeared on Raina's face. The warmth came from her palms, and her heart was also warm. In the morning, Mag had a hot pot meal for no reason. Because he couldn't explain why hot pot was not suitable in the morning. After thinking about it carefully, other than the fact that it was a little time-consuming, hot pot seemed to be quite suitable in the morning in winter. The hot and spicy instantly drove away the chill and sleepiness. After the morning service, Elizabeth didn't rush to leave. Instead, she waited for everyone to leave, and then told Meg in detail about what happened last night. "Has the competition in the same industry become so bad now?" Meg frowned. It would be strange if no one chased after outstanding talents, but using such despicable means to threaten her family really made him feel disgusted and displeased. He knew very well what Raina's mother meant to her. He was also a little touched that this lass still chose to stay in Chaos City in the face of such generous conditions and terrifying threats. "Let me settle this matter," Meg said coldly as he removed his apron and threw it on the table at the side. Chapter 1499. 10 minutes. I want all the information on this person. Meg walked into an information house in an alley and tossed a bag of gold coins and a piece of paper onto the counter. The sleepy-eyed shopkeeper took the bag of money and opened it. His eyes lit up immediately, and he put on a flattering smile. He kept the bag of money, picked up the piece of paper, and respectfully said, "Please wait for a moment." 10 minutes later, Meg left the information house with a black cloth bag and quickly disappeared into the alley. So he's the illegitimate son of the Marquis family. He worked so hard for so many years to get the Marquis surname before his father passed away. I wonder what's his most precious thing. Meg finished reading the last piece of paper and laughed mockingly. He took out a windproof lighter and lit up the stack of information in his hand. He watched it turn into ashes in the fire and then stepped into the snow before turning to leave this deserted courtyard. The information was very detailed, and he didn't waste the 1,000 gold coins. Bennett, the owner of the tea house called Ben, should be called Bennett Marquis. He was the illegitimate son of the former head of the Marquis family after a drunken affair. He was also the brother of the current head of the family, Bowen. However, this pair of half-brothers didn't have a harmonious relationship, and their lives were completely different. Bennett wasn't welcomed by the Marquis family because he was an illegitimate son. Even his biological father didn't care about him. He didn't even acknowledge his identity, and didn't allow him to use the Marquis surname. He walked out of the slums, started from scratch, and gradually made a name for himself in Chaos City. He had many businesses under his name. That tea house was just one of his businesses on the surface. He also owned 2 casinos, 5 to 6 brothels, and controlled the slums' labor and other businesses. With his performance in Chaos City's business world, he finally received recognition before his father passed away, and was allowed to use the Marquis surname. In recent years, he had been working hard to raise his status in Chaos City's business world. He had put on a beautiful coat of grandeur on himself, and became a great philanthropist in many people's eyes. He had even tried to overthrow his elder brother, and become the head of the Marquis family. This was a cliched family drama. Although the information did not list his family history in detail, Meg could already smell the blood and brutality in it. This kind of guy, a simple investigation will lead to a bunch of questions. Since he also has something precious, I'll let him experience the feeling of losing it. Meg put away his disguise, walked to the entrance of the alley, and rode away on his bicycle. Killing people was the simplest thing to do, but it was too boring. The same thing might happen again in the future. He needed to kill a chicken as a warning to those monkeys. Meg rode to the Grey Temple and met Burton, the head of the intelligence department, who was in charge of communicating with him at the side door. Head Burton, according to the rules, I should have partial access to the Grey Temple's investigation authority, right? Meg asked Burton with a smile. The half-white-haired orc Burton nodded, and said, yes. According to the rules, Mr. Meg can access all the Grey Temple's information below the top-secret level, and mobilize the Grey Temple's limited resources, including assisting in the investigation. Burton looked at Meg with a scrutinizing gaze. The Grey Temple had never given someone who was not an official member of the Grey Temple such a high level of access. However, this was an order from Lord Roland, and he had specially asked him to cooperate with Meg as much as possible. It was clear that he had his merits. My safety and that of the restaurant's employees and mine are under threat. I need the Grey Temple to help me investigate this person. Meg passed a piece of paper to Burton. Threat to your life. Burton's expression became serious. This was a very serious matter. Roland had previously ordered that ensuring Mr. Meg's safety was a 5th-level response. I will arrange for someone to investigate this immediately, and send someone to protect Mr. Meg and the restaurant's employees, Burton said seriously as he kept the paper. You don't have to send anyone to the restaurant, but I will have to trouble you to protect the staff dormitory. Meg nodded slightly, and bade farewell to Burton before leaving on his bicycle. Bennett Marquis. Burton opened the paper, and looked at the name on it. He frowned and pondered for a while. It was a familiar name. Then, he put the paper away, and returned to the Grey Temple. activate the 5th-level response mechanism, set up a special investigation team, and stop all the work at hand. As the leader of the investigation team, find out everything about this person in 3 days. Burton gathered 7 core members of the intelligence department and looked at them with a serious expression. The other departments of the Grey Temple will fully cooperate with our investigation. Meg was not worried about the restaurant's safety at all. If Bennett dared to do anything to the restaurant, Amy could crush them a few times. The only thing he had to pay attention to was Raina's mother. She was just an ordinary person, and any seemingly ordinary accident could have serious consequences on her. However, with the people from the Grey Temple keeping an eye on her, this problem did not exist. The most important thing about finding the Grey Temple was that they were professionals, and had the authority to enforce the law. If they found out anything, they could just do it directly. In the past, Bennett might have been able to use all sorts of methods and reasons to avoid being investigated, so he would use a reason that the Grey Temple could not reject to get them to investigate. He was sure that Roland would give a good investigation order if it concerned his safety. Meg parked his bicycle in front of the tea house called Ben. The dazzling tea house looked very grand. There were 2 good-looking waiters in black standing at the door, and they were looking at Meg with a smile. This was the most high-end tea house in Chaos City. It had a clean background, and was doing a proper and elegant business. It was also one of Bennett's important identities to the outside world. Since you're here, it won't be too late to leave after having some tea. Meg parked his bicycle at the entrance, and walked to the tea house's entrance. One of the waiters opened the door with a warm smile, and said, "Hello, do you have a reservation? Tell your boss that Meg is here for tea. He will make the arrangements," Meg replied with a smile as he walked into the dazzling tea house's main hall. "All right. Please wait in the lounge for a while. I will go and report this." That waiter's eyes lit up. It seemed like this person was a friend of the boss. He quickly left. "What?" Bennett, who was snuggling in the arms of a red-haired beauty, heard the waiter's report, and immediately sat up from the sofa. He raised his voice, and said, "You mean that Meg from Amy's?" He didn't say his identity, that waiter said fearfully. It seemed like that person was not a friend of the boss. Bennett suddenly laughed. As he got up, he said, he's got some guts. He actually dared to come here first. Then, let me go and meet this Mr. Mac. No pop-up window. Chapter 1500. Yo. What a rare guest. The famously busy Mr. Mac actually came to my tea house for tea, Bennett said with a smile as he walked out and looked at Meg, who was standing in front of a wooden carving. Meg turned around, and looked at the balding middle-aged man. He looked exactly the same as the portrait, and smiled as well. "Yes. If not for Boss Bennett, I wouldn't have the time to come and have tea with you." Bennett's expression froze, and a light flashed across his eyes. However, he quickly recovered, and smilingly said, "In that case, Mr. Mac, please come to the VIP room. Let's sit down and have some tea." "There's no need for that. I suddenly changed my mind. I don't want tea." Meg looked into Bennett's eyes, and took 2 steps forward. He lowered his voice, and whispered into his ear, "I came here today to tell you something. Don't touch my people. Otherwise, you will lose everything." Bennett's lips twitched, and a mocking smile appeared on his face. He also lowered his voice, and said, "You are really confident. You don't have the final say in Chaos City. Let's see who she will choose based on our abilities. This is not a multiple-choice question at all, because your choice has already been eliminated." Meg smiled, and turned to walk towards the door. When he reached the door, he raised his hand, and smilingly said, "You'd better wipe your butt clean. It will look better when your pants are removed." This fellow. Bennett looked at Meg, who disappeared at the door, and clenched his fists with a dark expression. A tall and thin man appeared beside Bennett, and softly said, "Should we teach him a lesson? Don't touch him first." Bennett shook his head. After some thought, he said, "But Miss Rayner is really disappointing. Let's give her a warning tonight." "All right." The tall and thin man nodded, and a cruel smile flashed across his face. Lose everything? Bennett chuckled. A chef who made a name for himself by cooking really thought he was standing at the top of Chaos City. He had plenty of ways to make his restaurant close down. Meg walked out of the tea house and turned to look at the shiny golden signboard. He pushed his bicycle away under the shocked gaze of the waiter at the door. It was a gentleman's etiquette to announce the start of a good show. He never lied. If he said he was going to make all his businesses close down, he would make sure none of them were left. He was going to strip him of his clothes and let everyone see how ugly he was. Bennett Marquis? Roland looked at the brief Burton handed and thought. And nodded. I also want to see how much filth is hidden under the prosperity of the 4 big families. Burton nodded and left the room. Lad. Did this couple's temper become better? Moreover, he had learned to seek help from the government to solve problems. This style of doing things is not like Alex at all. Roland chuckled and tapped the table lightly with his fingertips. That's good too. During this critical period, we should get rid of the unstable elements in the city first. We can also replenish the city's treasury with more illegal assets. The Grey Temple's intelligence department quickly got busy. The scouts left the Grey Temple one after another and went to the designated location to investigate. Most of them were the most experienced and powerful scouts in the Grey Temple. Meg prepared a table full of dishes for lunch. Meg looked at everyone who was already seated and said with a smile, "Before lunch today, I would like to announce 2 things to everyone." Everyone looked at Meg curiously. Firstly, due to the restaurant's considerable profits, from today onwards, everyone's basic salary will be increased to 20,000 copper coins a month. Those who are still in the probation period will be promoted to full members immediately, and a 20% increase in salary will be established every year, Meg said with a smile. Everyone was stunned for a moment, and then a surprised smile appeared on their faces. Wow, our salary has suddenly increased by 5 times, MIA exclaimed in surprise. With 20,000 copper coins, we can buy a lot of beggars' chickens, right? Gina calculated seriously. 20,000. Raina's eyes lit up slightly, but it dimmed very quickly. To her, the amount of salary did not have much meaning now. 20,000. That's a lot of money. Jane's throat moved. She could not believe that she could get so much salary every month. After hesitating for a while, she looked at Meg and said softly, "Boss, I shouldn't get the same salary as my sisters. I can't do anything well now. I also think that the salary now is already a lot. It's many times more than my previous job. I'm just doing a job that anyone can do well. I shouldn't get paid so much." Yarbemia also looked at Meg and said with a smile, "I like this job, and I like the restaurant." Without waiting for the others to speak, Meg said seriously, "As you can see, because of all of you, the restaurant can operate stably and efficiently. At the same time, we've earned very good profits. So, this is what you deserve. If you refuse, it will make me look like a capitalist." This was actually something that Meg had been considering during this period of time. The efficiency of the restaurant's employees had allowed the restaurant to maintain an efficient operation with limited manpower. If a restaurant of the same size had to serve such a large number of customers every day, just the labor cost alone would be 10 times higher, not to mention the various messy things that would be brought about by the large number of customers. Meg was indeed very satisfied with this group of ladies. The low salary made him feel a little embarrassed. Raina's incident was a fuse. An employee with outstanding talent and ability should get a salary that matched her ability and contribution. Otherwise, there would be no talk of happiness. He also did not want to rely on empty promises to prolong his employees' lives. Although the others did not quite understand what a capitalist meant, they could see Meg's attitude from his serious expression. Although they hesitated, they did not continue to refute. As for the second matter, Meg looked at Raina and said with a smile, "I've decided to officially appoint Raina as the manager of the designated hot pot area. She will be fully responsible for all the restaurant's business activities related to hot pot." Me? Raina, who had a lot on her mind, was stunned for a moment. She looked up and met Meg's gentle and trusting gaze. Her gaze was a little hesitant and tangled. If it was before, she would have been very surprised. But now, she did not even know how to protect her mother, nor did she know if she could continue to work in the restaurant. She hesitated and shook her head. I think my ability is limited. I may not be able to bear such a big responsibility. It doesn't matter what you think. If I think you can do it, then you can. Listen to me. Meg looked into Raina's eyes and said seriously and sincerely, please remember your identity. You are a member of Amy's. You will always have a strong restaurant behind you, a restaurant that is stronger than anyone can imagine. Come, take a look at our membership list. Meg took out a small notebook and handed it to Raina. These are our barber, restaurant's paid members. Chapter 1501. Meg's membership system was implemented very smoothly. There was already a group of unimaginably powerful big shots in the little notebook. At least in Chaos City, any one of them was a big shot. Of course, these were all superficial. The most powerful person in Amy's was the lady boss, a woman who dared to go head-to-head with the Wind Forest, and even had a 50% chance of winning. There was also a beautiful, P2E, elegant, and powerful boss. Raina looked at those names in the little notebook, and her eyes gradually lit up. As a native of Chaos City, she knew very well what those names represented. What she didn't expect was that these people who stood at the top of Chaos City were actually the restaurant's members. That was simply too shocking. If anyone bullies you, just tell me. The restaurant and we will always stand behind you, Meg said with a smile. Millimeter. If anyone dares to bully you, we will all stand behind you, Yarbemia said with a nod. If they are bad guys, I will help Big Sister Raina to chase them all away. I am super awesome, Amy said seriously as she clenched her little fists. Someone bullied you? Irina asked Raina with a perplexed look. This strange atmosphere made her a little confused. She thought for a while, and added, who is it? I will help you beat him to death. Everyone. Raina looked at everyone who was looking at her with concern. Tears were already welling up in her eyes, and she didn't know how to break the news all of a sudden. Meg glanced at Raina, and could understand her dilemma and fear. He smiled, and said, all right, the two matters have been announced. Let's eat. Everyone didn't ask any more questions, and began to enjoy the food. Elizabeth glanced at Meg. Although she didn't know what he had done, she had a feeling that he had already arranged everything. He was calm, and was considerate of Raina's feelings. By the way, boss, many customers were asking about the beef and chili lung slice this morning. When will this dish be officially released? Yarbemia suddenly asked when he was eating halfway. This. Meg thought for a moment and said, let's postpone it for a few days after we return from the Twilight Forest. The customers are probably going to wail again. Yarbemia shrugged her shoulders. Due to yesterday's duel, the husband and wife lung slice had attracted a lot of attention. Many customers had already asked her about it. Good vegetables need more grinding. Just reply to them like this. Meg said with a smile. It was not that he was trying to hide it. He was planning to keep a secret dish when he went to the Twilight Forest, and the spicy beef and beef lung slice was his only choice. As expected, during the lunch hour, most of the customers still asked about the sliced beef and chili lung slices. After hearing Yarbemia's reply, he could only sigh and accept his fate. What could he do? The little boss was glaring at him from the side. He couldn't possibly be so angry that he would smash the shop, right? Master, I'm here for class. Harris rang the bell at the entrance of the restaurant half an hour after the lunch hour ended. He smiled at Meg, who opened the door. Chapman was standing behind him. Please come in. Meg opened the door and let Harris in. He looked at Chapman, who was guarding the door, and couldn't help but smile. Aren't you coming in? Grandmaster is teaching master culinary skills. I shouldn't be present. I can just guard here, Chapman said respectfully. Come in. If you want to learn, we can learn together, Meg said with a smile. This disciple of Harris was indeed quite interesting. Chapman looked at Harris. Harris rolled his eyes and said, "Your grandmaster has already spoken. Why are you still standing at the door? Are you a door god?" "Yes." Chapman nodded before following him in. Meg brought Harris to the kitchen and passed them the aprons as he said, "Something unexpected happened this morning, so we can only reschedule it to the afternoon." "It's all right. We don't do anything all day, anyway," Harris replied with a smile. He didn't mind being stood up in the morning at all. He looked at Meg's kitchen with sparkling eyes and exclaimed, "Master, your kitchen is too professional, isn't it? Those two giant luminous pearls embedded in it must be very expensive, right? And these shiny kitchen utensils, how did you keep them so bright all the time? This wall of knives is too comprehensive. I didn't expect there to really be a chef who can keep the kitchen so clean and tidy. It's unbelievable. Those two on top are for lighting. The kitchenware is made of stainless steel, so these knives are not used under normal circumstances. One fathead fish is enough to deal with 99% of the situations. As for keeping the kitchen clean and tidy, isn't that the most basic thing a chef needs to do?" Meg replied calmly, "There are many chefs who know that, but I have only met 3 who can seriously carry it out. Master is one of them." Harris retracted his gaze and looked at Meg with a smile as he said, "However, this is indeed something that is worth carrying out. All right, then let's start learning this husband and wife lung slice now. Before we start learning officially, let me tell you about the origin of this dish." Meg quickly got into the role of a master with a serious expression. The most direct benefit of the great teacher talent point +1 was that he didn't feel any sense of shame when he called himself a master. At the same time, a set of teaching words was automatically generated in his mind. Harris and Chapman listened attentively. The latter even took out a small notebook and took notes as he listened. He was totally at the level of a learning committee member. As for that skill called Midas touch, Meg originally thought it was a standard skill of an alchemist, and that it would open up the path to riches for those who were poor. He didn't expect it to be a stupid brain represented by stone. Midas touch skill description. Performing the Midas touch skill on the user once would allow the user to quickly understand and accept the knowledge imparted. Even the stupidest brain could become smart. This was the best cheat for a teacher. With this skill, even if Meg couldn't continue running his restaurant in the future, he would still be a special grade teacher at any school. However, there was a condition for using this skill. The user had to be the disciple or grand disciple of the caster. Meg roughly explained the origin of the husband and wife lung slice, but he neglected some details and parts that weren't easy to explain. Then, he walked to the stove and picked out the spices from the spices section as he said, "The braising of the husband and wife lung slice is the most crucial and important step. The success or failure of the braising determines the basic taste and texture of the husband and wife lung slice. It basically establishes the foundation of this dish. Therefore, for today's lesson, we will start from understanding the various spices that are needed for the braising. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.